Hi everyone, my name is AJ. Welcome to The Money Store. This is a channel where we talk about La Luz del Mundo, lldm, also known as the Light of the World, religious organization, religious cult that has been going through some interesting um, points in its history, going through some interesting events and changes over the past, basically, I would say the past 5 years, a little over 5 years. And yeah, today's video is something I feel like I have to do, and it is going back to a particular reading that I had known about since it had come out, and only recently have I read it, gone through it, and properly digested it. I recognize that I've had other people tell me about this, and I certainly take their ideas and we'll discuss them here. But I won't name any people in particular, but I have at least like two people or three people that I could point to that have sort of informed me and introduced me to this. Topic of today's video is CESNUR, the Center for Studies of New Religions. It is based in Italy, I believe. It is run, or it is, tied to this person called Massimo Introvigne, and we'll get into all of that. This is going to be one of my longer videos. I hope that these are helpful and interesting, and I do like this. I do like this one angle that we can take here. But before we continue through this video, be sure to comment, be sure to like, subscribe, send me an email, give me some feedback, give me some guidance as to where you think this channel should go, what sort of other angles and kind of content can I try to make in English for posting on here on YouTube, the public platform, so as to show up on the feeds of people that are interested in La Luz del Mundo, whether they be members that are in it and that want to find something, and then for some reason they may end up finding this. Or may this be useful to people that are outside of the church already and are interested in these different topics that are going on. As I've said in previous videos, I'm writing a book on Luz del Mundo, and presently I'm reading quite deeply, and I found this to be an interesting uh, um, publication, an interesting piece to dissect, and we'll see how long this video can go, but to dissect and to examine, to go through, in order to paint La Luz del Mundo in a particular light that it does not want to be painted in, maybe. Because this thing has its origins, it has a reason for existing, and we'll get into all of that. So again, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Send me a notification. Send me something that you think I haven't read that I should read and have on my radar as I continue to research. This is an interesting topic for reasons I'll get into later. But I hope that this also, using this angle and doing a video like this will help to give you guys an idea of what I'm interested in going forward, and why I think it is that there's still that while the criminal case against Nason Garcia is over now, the iron can still be struck. The iron is still hot. There are still members that are part of the organization. There are still people that have continued to remain loyal to the organization, to the doctrine, have not left, and that fundamentally now continue to be these sort of tragic figures in the media, and the way that coverage of La Luz del Mundo continues to exist in the present day. Okay. I started ranting, but I think I should start diving into some of my points. So let me know what you think about this. CESNUR. CESNUR is the Center for Studies on New Religions. They have a certain website that we're going to go to that, well, no, let's not go to the website yet. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go to my copy of CESNUR's, of the organization's journal. This is, if you can see, I don't know how the ultimate video will look like, but as you'll see, this is the journal of CESNUR. This is an issue, volume 4, issue number 2, from March-April 2020. March and April 2020. So this is right before or right as the coronavirus global pandemic was unfurling. Especially, there was a certain level of intensity at those points. that is different from previous points. But this is important because keep in mind that they have been writing this for, sometime prior to this, even though it is released in 2020. And this document you can find easily yourself online if you look it up. It's about 79 pages. I don't think you can see my cursor on here, but it is 79 pages that you can see up top. And it came out in the spring of 2020. The director in charge of the Journal of CESNUR is Marco Respinti. Editor-in-chief of the Journal of CESNUR is Massimo Introvigne. And these are just some other people that are part of the organization to one extent or another. This journal is printed out of Torino, Italy. And here's the table of contents. The entire journal is dedicated to the topic of La Luz del Mundo. And let's read the 6 different articles that are here. The titles are La Luz del Mundo, A Short History, written by Massimo Introvigne. The second one, The Rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas, by J. Gordon Melton. The next one, The Concept of the Divinity in La Luz del Mundo, by Sara Pozos. La Luz del Mundo, Social and Charitable Activities, by Rosita Sorite. I'm not too sure how to pronounce that, but yeah, let's move on. The second to last one is Field Report, The Light of the World in Greater Los Angeles, by Donald Westbrook. Okay. Discrimination against La Luz del Mundo members after the arrest of the Apostle, by Francisco Tenorio. A couple things before I continue with this video. This document is interesting because this is some sort of academic, scholarly outlet, the Journal of CESNUR, that is meant to study new religions, and there will be a number of claims that are made. There will be a number of claims and portrayals of La Luz del Mundo that are going to be present throughout this, that are carefully curated, and they're not an accident. And I hope that we can, in reading this, that we can poke some holes through it and see how this is actually not what it seems to be. It is what it seems to be, but it also doesn't live up to some sort of standard that it tries to have, and that we should. And this is the point of the video. Our standards should be much higher for what can make it into a journal like this, and what ways La Luz del Mundo is portrayed. For example, the documentaries from HBO, from Netflix, from Hulu had their own, from A&E, all the work from Univision, work from Telemundo, Milenio, etc. All those sort of media outlets, going from like large hours-long documentaries to a series of continued snippets of video reporting and writings, like comes from Univision. There's a range of that from media companies, and those things, for the most part, portray the church quite accurately, or at least in a way that I rarely have disagreements with. For example, I think one of the major disagreements that I have with media companies that talk about La Luz del Mundo, whenever they do, and Univision, for example, can sometimes talk about how La Luz del Mundo has 5 million members. And that claim, as we've talked about on this channel many times, and I'm gonna bring it up much more here. That claim has been peddled around since the 1990s, and it has never been. I would say it has never been true. That La Luz del Mundo has never reached what could be counted as 5 million members, but yet the concept, the claim has been peddled around so much that it sort of falls into the illusory truth effect, wherein it is repeated so much that it becomes kind of real. And people have been, I remember hearing this figure when I was much younger, like just a child, basically. And then 5 years ago, when Nathan Garcia was arrested in Los Angeles, when I heard the spokespeople of the church still peddling the 5 million member claim, and that Univision and those companies can still sort of say it, and they'll probably still continue to say it into the future, but mostly because they can't really dive into why that figure is accurate or not, in the way that I do. But also, it's just repeated so much that it sort of gains a life of its own, and it continues to be out there. I bring that up because that is one way in which media companies fall short of giving a real accurate and real critical, justifiably critical portrayal of La Luz del Mundo. But here in this journal, you're going to find a different portrayal, wherein people that are church members are going to write, and people that are not church members are going to write about La Luz del Mundo. And it's interesting in who gets to do that and who doesn't get to do that, and in what ways it is brought here. So, for example, starting with the first article, La Luz del Mundo, a short history. It is written by Massimo Introvigne. Now, this guy is someone who we've talked about in previous videos. Do refer to somewhere within the previous two that I have uploaded. For more background onto this person, I would say that my major introduction to this person, I've known the name, but then my real major introduction to where I got a greater idea of who he was from Dante Mandela in the channel Analizando la Doctrina lldm. I think they may have changed the name of the channel, but basically I bring that up because back in the fall of 2021, that channel run by the guy with the pseudonym Dante Mandela, he had a video on Massimo Introvigne, and basically what you have to know is that Massimo Introvigne is some sort of Italian sociologist. This guy is not a church member. This guy is not a member of La Luz del Mundo. This guy is some sort of guy who is brought in to have some sort of closeness with the church and then write about it in a positive light. As I have talked about in previous videos, there are ways in which that writing is actually not very scholarly, to begin with. And then it is also very puff piece like. And then it is also very inaccurate and kind of wishy-washy about La Luz del Mundo. And, anyone who in La Luz del Mundo, or just basically any person who is worth their salt, should be able to understand that when someone is writing about an institution or is trying to be scholarly, or what is trying to do some sort of literary portrayal of anything that exists in the real world, that this guy is not up there in terms of who you would like to be doing it. That there are many holes to go through, and basically I just want to point out that it is interesting that this guy gets to be the person who gets to write the short history of the church, and it's not someone else doing it here in this place. Now, mind you, he sort of helps run the journal, but still, why have him? Because the next chapter is The Rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas by J. Gordon Melton. I don't know if J. Gordon Melton is a member of La Luz del Mundo. I basically think he isn't. I don't think this person is. This is a person who apparently taught at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, to my understanding. And again, why is it that this guy is the one who gets to be to write about the rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas? Okay, and so much of this, even though the short history is going to talk about how La Luz del Mundo was started in Mexico and then eventually crossed the border and became part of the United States. That'll be introduced in the first portion, but then there's these other two chapters, like about the rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas and the light of the world in Greater Los Angeles, and how those are basically taking place in the U.S. Those are large places where those are main targets of La Luz del Mundo in the U.S. But yeah, I just find it interesting because the third chapter, the concept of the divinity in La Luz del Mundo, is written by Sara Pozos. Sara Pozos is a member of La Luz del Mundo and is a basic mouthpiece for the church, who is not necessarily right now, I guess, viewed as the main spokesperson, but has been the main spokesperson in the past before for the church. And as I've pointed out in other videos of mine, this person is just paid and exists to lie for the services of propping up this organization and trying to clean its reputation within grander Mexican and worldly society. So we'll get into that. I've read this journal up and down a couple of times, and I have notes here. Then you'll see things that are highlighted and probably have seen them already. But in going through this, I'll try to refer to notes that I have written down, and then also what I do have highlighted in the document itself. This fourth chapter that we'll read again is La Luz del Mundo, social and charitable activities. That one's kind of interesting. We'll get to that in a bit. It is written by Rosita Sorite. I don't know if that's pronounced correctly, but that person is not a member of La Luz del Mundo, I would reckon. This person is from like Eastern Europe. I'm not sure where, but their name is unique. You can look them up quickly. I'm not going to do it again now, but basically, this person is not a member of La Luz del Mundo, and here they are writing about it. Here's another one. This is called Field Report: The Light of the World in Greater Los Angeles by Donald A. Westbrook. This is another person who, as we'll see in the thing, is not a member of La Luz del Mundo. And the last one, Discrimination Against La Luz del Mundo members after the arrest of the apostle, is written by Francisco Tenorio. This one is interesting in that we'll talk about it when we get to it in terms of its content. But this is a person, Francisco Tenorio, who is not allied and is not an apologist or some sort of defender of La Luz del Mundo anymore. At one point, this guy is from Brazil, and he's some sort of Christian theologian, preacher, scholar. He runs in different Christian circles, and basically somehow he got close to La Luz del Mundo, and he got this opportunity to write about them, which we'll talk about the contents of his writing. But basically, if you don't know, you should know that Francisco Tenorio is here writing in defense of the church and the apostle and whatnot. But about a year after this released, I think like in late 2020 or sometime in 2021, this guy actually became very public and outspoken about how he wanted to back away from La Luz del Mundo. He felt like he was duped by the leaders of the church. He felt like he was misled, and he felt like he was I don't want to say cultivated, but lured into writing positively about the church. And here he lends his name and his writing to the church for certain reasons. And you should know that he's not a member of La Luz del Mundo, but since this came out, and since his other whatever other writings and words he has given for words in general that he has given for La Luz del Mundo, he's actually backed away from the church. So I want to talk about this, but just not yet, because before we read through the entire contents of this journal, I want to show how there's another part to this project here, to this collaborative project here. So I'm going to stop share, and we're going to share another thing I have here. We're going to go to the website of CESNUR itself. This is the website of CESNUR, and here they have logged down the 2022 conference that they had in Quebec, Canada, Quebec City, Canada. I don't think you can see my cursor, but it's in red text here. From the 16th to the 18th of June in 2022. So keep in mind that the journal had come out 2 years and 3 months prior to this. So that journal comes out in the spring of 2020. And then one can presume that there was a conference that was set up and ready for that year, for 2020, but given the coronavirus pandemic, they likely had to postpone it for 2 years. So this is 2 years and 2 months, and this is 2 years and like 3 months later. And basically, we don't know the contents of this discussion here, of this event, but surely they talked about what they wrote about. And we're going to see the same common names that we saw in the table of contents. And basically, this is La Luz del Mundo as it exists in an academic setting, some sort of learned, scholarly setting, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so if you look up Luz del Mundo, you will see that on one of these days, I can't see which day, on Friday, June 17th, there was a component of the event wherein it was titled this is the name of the title, the Luz del Mundo Church in Scholarly Perspective. So that's the name of the title, and that's basically what the CESNUR journal is doing. And this is a session that took place for like an hour and a half. Susan Palmer is someone who gave an introduction. And then there is a panel that is titled "A Fast-Growing Religious Movement, a Global Charitable Network, and an Apostle in Jail." And the panelists, the people who were speaking in this group to an audience, are Massimo Introvigne, Sara Pozos, J. Gordon Melton, of Baylor University, Waco, Texas. So this is like some sort of professor that was there, but yeah, we'll see how good or useful his work is. So yeah, Sara Pozos from Guadalajara, J. Gordon Melton. This guy is not a member of La Luz del Mundo, but he's the one person, getting to write a history of it to some extent. Same thing with Introvigne. Rosita Sorite, I'm not too sure I don't know how to pronounce that, but this person is from Lithuania, or at least they work there in Lithuania. So, we can bet that this person is not a member of La Luz del Mundo. The next person is Donald Westbrook. They're also in the journal. They are from San Jose State University in California. And there is a respondent who is Big Valle Estrada. So, a person who's missing is Francisco Tenorio. He is not here. But yeah, here we have all these other people who wrote a component for the journal that we were going to read today. And again, Francisco Tenorio is not here because at this point in the summer and in mid-June of 2022, Tenorio had for like a year already denounced La Luz del Mundo and like backed away. And he was on this YouTube show and this other YouTube show, and he was kind of all over the place, being outspoken about how he regrets ever coming close to the light of the, ever coming close to the church, and trying to speak nicely about it, because he believes the Jane Does and the righteousness of the criminal case against Nason is what I'm trying to say. And again, if you still haven't, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you think about this. I'm sort of getting into the weeds here, and I haven't gotten into that. But yeah, I just wanted to show this because this took place 2 years and 2 months after the journal that we are going to read. And again, this took place basically 2 weeks, or like a little over a week after Nason Joaquin pled guilty. He pleads guilty on a Friday, and then in early June, a couple days later, in early June, he goes through the sentencing. The Jane Does, read their victim impact statements, etc. He receives a sentence, and then eventually later he's transferred. But that came 3 years after he was in jail, and had been fending, through his legal representation, just fending off challenge after challenge, and really trying to prolong the process. And it is interesting to know that, because keep in mind that whatever this collaboration, it's been going on since, let's say 2019, maybe even earlier. Maybe these people even, actually, Massimo Introvigne has been writing for the church since like 2018, 2018, 2017. And so, keep this in mind as we go through the document, because these people have despite the conviction of Nason Joaquin, all these people have decided to speak. I'm not surprised about Sara Pozos, obviously, but like, or Estrada, but the interesting component is that these other people still decided to speak about Nason. And we don't know what this apostle in jail, or anything was discussed in this situation, but surely the temperature check in the room is that, like, yeah, the panelists are going to agree that Nason was probably framed. Sara Pozos is probably going to think whatever the fuck she wants to fucking think about it, but Estrada as well. But like all these other people, are not believers in La Luz del Mundo, and so they're going to come to the speaking and writing about La Luz del Mundo, this sort of writing and coverage of it. They're going to justify it along the lines of like, oh, well, the judicial process was maybe iffy, or like the system is corrupt. They're not going to say anything about like, yeah, he has magic powers and he shouldn't be in jail, like Sara Pozos would say. But I hope that makes sense. So yeah, keep that in mind in the context of what's going on, because it's time to get into this next component of actually reading the journal. So we're gonna go through reading this journal. I have stuff highlighted. I hope that it's not gonna be a disturbance to you all. You can find this for free yourself online. I found this for free and in full. So I sort of deliberated on whether to actually show the document in its entirety throughout this video. So in case because I don't want to get flagged here on YouTube, but essentially I think it's important um to discuss, and because it's free online, I'm just going to rip it and run, just to show the whole document in its entirety. I'm gonna skim. I think I may just mumble in reading some things, and I'm only gonna go through certain parts that I'm gonna base off some notes that I have here, and I'm gonna base off the highlighting, and then I'm gonna talk about why to certain pressure points that we can put on the document. So this is chapter. Let me get a look at the time. Okay. So this is chapter 1. This is La Luz del Mundo, a short history by Massimo Introvigne. I'm going to read the abstract in its entirety, and then we'll see what we'll do about the rest of how we'll read or mumble through the rest of this whole thing. So the abstract, as it reads by Massimo Introvigne, is La Luz del Mundo is one of the fastest growing religious movements in the world. It seems to have experienced no decline even after its current leader, Nason Joaquin Garcia, was arrested and detained in California on charges of sexual abuse in 2019. The article reconstructs the origins of La Luz del Mundo in 1920s Mexico and its growth under 3 subsequent leaders who have been recognized as God's apostles for our times: Aaron Joaquin Gonzalez, Samuel Joaquin Flores, and Nason Joaquin Garcia. At the time of this writing, Apostle Nason continues to direct from his prison cell in California, a church that becomes, from Mexican, increasingly globalized and international. So the number one component and claim of basically this entire journal for why this whole journal exists is this claim that La Luz del Mundo is one of the fastest growing religious movements in the world. Keep that in mind, because as we have seen in other writings that Massimo Introvigne has given for the church, this guy doesn't actually seem to have any fucking numbers or charts or something of real substance to back up these claims and help us visualize what this grandiose claim can even mean. So many religious movements can claim this, and it is not. We'll see. This is a high bar. This is a high bar to pass. So I will begin here. We're on page 4. This is the start of this first chapter. Mexico, 1926, the social context. It was on December 12th, 1926. Catholics in Guadalajara were celebrating the day of the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and in a tense and contradictory mood. The statue was toured throughout the city in a procession. Churches were full. There was a feast for drinking and dancing, and even visiting local brothels. On the other hand, the city was well aware that a Catholic rebellion against the anti-clerical government of President Plutarco Elias Calles was about to erupt. Calles had emerged as a fierce opponent of the Catholic Church and spared no effort to impose in Mexico his own brand of Jacobin secularism. So, they're basically talking about tensions in Mexico over Catholicism's power and influence in 1926. And then this next chapter, on that day, a ragged non-Catholic preacher, like this is the first word that is used to talk about Eusebio Joaquin Gonzalez. That day, a ragged non-Catholic preacher arrived in Guadalajara with his wife, having walked his way there from faraway city of Monterrey. So here he's getting into La Luz del Mundo history. In the history, essentially, the founder is not in Guadalajara, Mexico. He's up north in Monterrey, and he has a vision, and then he embarks on this mission down to Guadalajara, which, as we have said here, he gets there in December 1926. So yeah, it was just funny that the word ragged is the first word used to describe Eusebio Joaquin. So the ragged guy, he was scandalized by the disorderly conduct of the Catholics on that day during their celebration. And then here Massimo Introvigne gets ahead of himself, and he writes, unbeknownst to the citizens of Guadalajara and the authorities, the destitute Aaron carried with him what will prove to be the most viable alternative to Catholicism in Mexico. We haven't gotten to that yet, but we'll get there. And it's actually not that, I don't know what the most viable alternative to Catholicism it means, but yeah, La Luz del Mundo is not the largest, it's not the second largest religion in Mexico. Catholicism for sure may be the first one, but the next group it's gonna surely be some other Christian-like group. It is not La Luz del Mundo, and I don't think it ever has been. So let's continue reading. In the 20th century, it was fashionable to depict the Cristero War as a social rebellion of impoverished peasants disappointed by a Mexican revolution that had kept none of its promises of social justice. And then, they write, Massimo continues to write about the Cristero War. And then there's this other paragraph where he talks about what does it mean to be an anti-Cristero, to be an anti-Cristero Catholic, to be anti-Catholic Church. Okay, let's move on. Obviously, religion is never a single factor for causing wars. All religious wars and insurrections are social and political. Okay, he's just saying there's just a lot of reasons for why there was war and conflict over religion in 1920s Mexico. But yeah, he keeps writing here, talking about the Cristero War in a movie called For Greater Glory. Okay, we're on page 5 now. He's talking about how to write about this. Hold on, we're gonna get to it. Okay, here's an important part to get to. The history of Protestantism in Mexico is another controversial theme, just like the history of Catholicism is what he's saying. Several Protestant denominations are present in Mexico from the 19th century, but even today, the percentage of Protestants in the total Mexican population is only around 7%, to which 1 million Mormons and 1.7 million Jehovah's Witnesses should be added. See Puckett 2017. This is a dissertation that I recently read by a person named Mary Puckett, and I spoke to them like 2 weeks ago. But we'll get to that in a bit. It is interesting that he is citing Mary Puckett. I don't know why for like statistics on like the people in Mexico back then, but the important component here is that he's saying that today the percentage of Protestants in the total Mexican population is only around 7%, to which 1 million Mormons and 1.7 million Jehovah's Witnesses should be added. This is kind of fucking weird to read, because let's say someone like Sara Pozos has been on television in 2019 saying that there are 1.8 or 1.9, something like that, million La Luz del Mundo members in Mexico in the present day. And that's not true. And that's never been true. Because and then also around that time, in 2019, when Nason Joaquin was arrested, someone like Silem Garcia has said on television, and I probably have it on my channel too. He said that there were like over 1 million, there was like 1.5 million La Luz del Mundo members in Mexico. He said something like that before, and that's not true either. And that's not true. That's a major exaggeration. And here, keep in mind what Massimo Introvigne's numbers are. But here, let me also add that in 2021, in early 2021, INEGI, INEGI, that is the Mexican census. And I've talked about it many times here before, but they came out with their numbers for everything, including religious groups. Catholics, of course, were the largest group, but in Mexico, in the entirety of Mexico, INEGI only counted 190 something thousand, under 200,000. So like around 190,000 La Luz del Mundo members in Mexico. And think of that in proportion to what Sara Pozos and what Silem Garcia have claimed there are in Mexico, because they'll claim that there's a fuck ton of La Luz del Mundo members in Mexico, but that's not true, because INEGI says that you're only 1/9 of the way right. Like you're only like a fifth or a sixth, or just you know they're really far from, you know, they haven't even hit 7 digits in the way that, you know, they La Luz del Mundo people think that they have. They haven't. They only have like upwards of 6 digits. And so again, like keep in mind that those claims of like we have 1.5 million La Luz del Mundo members in Mexico, we have 1.8, 1.9 million in Mexico, and compare that to what Massimo Introvigne is saying here. He is saying that, you know, there's 1 million Mormons in Mexico, and there's 1.7 million Jehovah's Witnesses in Mexico, and he's citing Mary Puckett. And so, you know, let's say that that's correct. Here he's plainly fucking saying that these other groups are larger than La Luz del Mundo in Mexico. And these people and these groups are not Catholic. You know, the Mormons are not Catholic, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are not Catholic. Then how the fuck, like earlier, he said earlier, then how the fuck is La Luz del Mundo the most viable alternative to Catholicism in Mexico? If, you know, like, you know, he still hasn't talked about how many members there are right now in Mexico. And maybe he does get into some sort of other, you know, numbers that he has, but like, you know, this whole thing about being the fastest growing religion in the world, and being a viable alternative to Catholicism in Mexico, that's not panning out right here. It's just like it's this is confusing and like really and like weird, like entangling writing that doesn't do what, you know, that really doesn't do La Luz del Mundo any favors here. So I straight up want to say that the another to put it in to reiterate this again, the reason for I think why it's interesting to read a document like this and talk about how La Luz del Mundo exists in a certain light and portrayal here. It is interesting because members of La Luz del Mundo, you should know that, you know, sometimes the leaders of the church will we'll talk, you know, we'll go on all day long about how the church is correct. It's always the one true church of God. We're infallible. Everyone else is wrong. Everyone else mistaken. You're lucky if you get to understand us and be part of us. If you don't, you know, well, then you're not lucky. God didn't have mercy on you to understand us. And like you find this to be so foreign, and this path that we're on that is so narrow and difficult. You know, you will instead prefer, it is understandable and pitiful that you may prefer the path that is wider and that is easier to traverse through. La Luz del Mundo members are also, you know, told about like the 5 million member claim. They're told that, you know, the entire world is interested in it, is interested in us. The apostle gets awards from El Salvador. He gets awards in this town in Mexico, in this other town in Mexico. We do charity work, etc. You know, they try to have a certain portrayal of La Luz del Mundo, and they try to make it seem like it's the fastest growing religion in the world, like Massimo Introvigne is saying. And, you know, they're trying to puff it up and boast about it and whatnot. But the very tragic thing is that academics, or like learned people outside of La Luz del Mundo, are brought into the church to observe it, to write about it, to get schmoozy with the leaders of the organization. And in doing that, they make the members feel like they are important, like they're being observed, like they are, let's say, like animals in a zoo, you know. But those academics and whatnot, well, why is it that they get access to Nason Joaquin, as I showed in that picture of Massimo Introvigne and Nason Joaquin? Why is it that this guy who's not a believer is going to get to have access to Nason Joaquin, and then get to write a short history of brief history of the church, and then it's still like sort of muddy and not as good as it can be for the church? And like you know, the major tragic thing here is that this is just a way to launder the church's reputation. This sort of writing and this sort of wishy-washy writing is just meant to launder the church's reputation, to make it seem legitimate, to make it seem more mainstream and defanged and not weird and not culty, to make it look not strange like that. But these people aren't even doing that well. And so, like, you know, they think about it, like, what is it worth to you that these people get to come into to write about the church, and then they're not going to do it well for you, but yet that they are, but yet the church leaders get to use them and get to get schmoozy with these people in order to clean up La Luz del Mundo's reputation, which, you know, not every member is supposed to be a target of any discrimination at all. Really, the only person that should be targeted is, you know, Nason Joaquin and whatever, and whoever his facilitators were. But like, you know, average members should not be facing any discrimination. But like but like but why would the average member continue to be an average member, could continue to be a member? Well, it is because those people are like sort of given or told about how stuff like this exists, and how it makes them feel special for being part of the church. But like it really doesn't, it shouldn't even be doing that, because this doesn't this doesn't even cover La Luz del Mundo well. I need a break. I'll be back. All right, let's continue. So I'm going to continue reading, skim reading. Protestantism was dismissed by Catholic propaganda as foreign, often American, which also applied to the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. That's interesting. And Protestantism. So Protestantism was viewed as foreign. It is derived from schisms that walked away from the one and only apostolic continuity of the Roman Catholic Church. And Catholics like to repeat that if not all Mexicans are Catholic, all are Guadalupanos. They say this half jokingly, but to the annoyance of non-Catholic. Oh, okay, whatever. He's basically talking about how Catholicism is the majority in Mexico, and that Protestantism can be viewed as an import into Mexico, something that is not, well, you know, Catholicism is an import too, but that is the not the most recent one. It would be Protestantism, but in this case that he's talking about. So then here he's talking about Plutarco Calles, etc. The divine or so Aaron and his followers firmly believed had in fact already manifested himself to a non-Catholic in Mexico that same year on April 6, 1926. Only not many Mexicans were aware of it. Anyways, he's just talking about social context of like when Aaron Eusebio has his dream. So here's more on Eusebio, his actual background. Eusebio was born Eusebio Joaquin Gonzalez Colotlan in the Mexican state of Jalisco on August 14, 1926, to a family of peasants. He was moreno, he was dark-skinned. He's a teacher for young children in his school. Like other young Mexicans of his time, Eusebio felt called to participate in the Mexican Revolution, seeking freedom and social justice. Sometimes in the early 1920s, he joined the militias of Francisco Pancho Villa, only to discover that his army practiced the very indiscriminate violence against the peasants that Villa had promised to fight. Eusebio thus left Villa in 1913, and he joined the Constitutionalist Army of the future Mexican president Venustiano Carranza. He founded the Constitucionalistas, much more disciplined than the Villistas. Yet something in the military life failed to satisfy him. Okay, so he talks about his military background. While on leave from Carranza's army in the early 1920s, he visited his parents who had moved to Guadalajara and met a young woman who, like his family, had relatives in Colotlan, Elisa Flores. They got married in 1925, and Elisa followed her husband to his new military post, first in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, then in San Pedro de las Colonias, Coahuila. It was in the latter town that Elisa, in late 1925, while visiting the local market, met a merchant, Rosa Murillo. As for other characters in the early history of the movement, I was not able to identify her years of life and death. Okay. Rosa was part of the Pentecostal branch of the church. So basically, Elisa Flores meets Rosa Murillo, who is part of the Pentecostal branch of Mexico. That was started with Romanita Carvajal de Valenzuela, a woman from the state of Chihuahua who had personally and participated in the revival that started in 1906 in Azusa Street in Los Angeles, one of the founding events of international Pentecostalism. So the important thing here is that Elisa Flores is the first person to have an experience, some sort of religious familiarity with Pentecostalism through this person named Rosa Murillo. Um, Eusebio is married to Elisa. Elisa meets this person, Rosa Murillo, who Rosa Murillo, like about 20 years earlier, was in Azusa Street in Los Angeles, and there was some event there that she had participated in, and that, you know, she's carrying this Pentecostalism around with her. So Elisa Flores, you know, gets to come into contact with that here, is what Massimo Introvigne is talking about. Although the branch directly connected with Romanita was the Iglesia Apostólica de la Fe en Cristo Jesús, the Oneness Pentecostal group, i.e. one dying, the traditional notion of, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Basically, this church was that there's connections to a guy named Joseph Stewart, into the Iglesia Evangélica Cristiana Espiritual, IECE, which is also still active in both North and South America. Okay, so basically he's talking about how La Luz Del Mundo also has some DNA, or its background, you know, its history is also tied to a group like IECE. Is and I've heard this before, but basically he's sort of going through early roots of La Luz Del Mundo. Elisa and later Eusebio as well met with Borrego and two curious characters, Antonio Munoz and Francisco Flores. These two guys, Antonio Munoz and Francisco Flores, were known as Saulo and Silas, who were like who claimed to have received the gift of prophecy, and they were guided by dreams and visions. At least they looked very much like biblical prophets with their sandals, long tunics, and equally long beards and hair. They opposed their charismatic authority to the institutional authority of the pastors and created considerable trouble along the different branches of the Pentecostal network in different Mexican states. Okay. So Eusebio was baptized by Silas at the end of 1925. His conversion put him at odds with few soldiers and his commander. Particularly, he refused to participate in the execution of a man claiming this was against the Bible. Eusebio decided to leave the army, and he and Elisa followed Saulo and Silas to Monterrey. As Eusebio later discovered, the two prophets' morality and sexual escapades were not exactly what one would expect from men from God. Okay. Oh my God, this is so funny. But so yeah, say those guys are having their sexual escapades. The thing here is that, like, it's just really ironic that the leader of La Luz del Mundo is in jail and has been in jail for like almost a year by the time that this was published. And, you know, there's a sentence like this that is it's just ironic and funny because yeah, Nason Joaquin certainly was having his sexual escapades, and they were breaking the law. And people like me and other folks are trying to, you know, talk about how this group and that, and how just how the authoritarianism and corruption can run rampant in a group like this. So sexual escapades. Eusebio falls out of favor with Saulo and Silas, is what they're saying here. Eusebio and Elisa move into the home of Saulo and Silas in Monterrey, and they are expected to do work, and it's unpaid work. They're like servants. Eusebio and Elisa stayed with Saulo and Silas until the fateful dawn of April 6, 1926. What happened then is the foundational event of Luz Del Mundo. According to this report, he was sleeping. Eusebio was awakened, and there was a thunderous noise, and a voice called to him, "Here is a man whose name will be Aaron. I will make his name known all around the world, and it will be a blessing." He tried to dismiss this as a dream and was awakened again by the voice. An enormous hand pointed at him, and the voice shouted, "Your name is Aaron." Eusebio then noticed that a hole was forming in the ceiling through which he could see the stars moving to form the words, quote, "Your name is Aaron, and I will make it known around the world, and it will be a blessing." Okay, so that's basically the vision that he has. In the subsequent decade, the two prophets movement will collapse under the weight of their scandals, and the Iglesia Evangélica Cristiana Espiritual will also go through several schisms. So basically, the church that Eusebio was kind of a part of has its own schisms, and then you know, Eusebio is going to be one of them. You know, he's someone who becomes an offshoot of these groups that he was close to back in the day. But again, it's ironic because he's talking about here how a religious movement, quote, will collapse under the weight of its scandals. And like, as we know in the present day, and as was happening day by day when this was published, around the time that this was published, La Luz del Mundo was falling under the weight of its own scandals, and it continues to. And I hope that we don't lose sight of how it can continue to in the future and how we can facilitate that further. For example, by reading and talking about work like such as this. So let's go to the next paragraph. But Eusebio, not Aaron, was not interested in these developments. He knew his Bible well enough to realize that Aaron, the brother of Moses, served as high priest in Israel. Okay. Okay. Aaron, Eusebio's election or llamamiento apostólico, i.e., the divine choice of an apostle to lead God's church, became a key belief for Aaron's followers. Okay. God, Aaron reported, had also commanded him to abandon Saulo and Silas. He left Monterrey on foot with Elisa and a small group of followers and started his journey to faraway Guadalajara, the city where his parents lived and where, as we have seen, he arrived on December 12, 1926, after a long and dangerous trip through a countryside where bandits and rebels roamed. Aaron's family rejected him. They were Catholics and would not support a non-Catholic religious enterprise. So, prospects did not seem bright in Guadalajara, yet Aaron believed the voice of God had commanded him to evangelize there. He started working odd jobs, blah, blah, blah. Soon the congregation started to grow, as did his family, to which another 7 children would be added between 1929 and 1937. This guy was having a lot of kids, and he was, spreading and starting his religious group. The first meetings were in private homes of La Luz del Mundo. But in 1934, a small place of worship was acquired in Guadalajara, Sector Libertad, in the calle 46, which offered the opportunity for registering the church with the municipal authorities. Aaron reported that God had revealed to him the name, quote, Iglesia de Dios Vivo, Columna y Apoyo de la Verdad, La Luz del Mundo, Church of the Living God, Pillar and Ground of the Truth, the Light of the World. Although the names mentioned in the legal documents were, quote, Iglesia Cristiana Espiritual Evangélica, and later Iglesia Cristiana Espiritual Evangélica La Luz del Mundo. So here he's saying that the church, La Luz del Mundo, used to go under the name of Iglesia Cristiana Espiritual Evangélica, and then they would add La Luz del Mundo as if they were some sort of subset of that group. But really, they are a schism of the group. But like it's interesting here that there is this admission that the church is still kind of borrowing that in its early naming. So by that time, Aaron had already ordained his first male ministers and 2 women as deaconesses, which is interesting. One of whom was his wife, I don't know who the other person is, but look, very early on in the church, there are women that are deacons. How many are there now in La Luz del Mundo? Basically none, right? But this sort of, well, there's some amount, but the anointing of these people goes back like that far, and I found that kind of surprising. In 1921, he had presided over the first yearly Santa Cena, Holy Supper, the main religious event for La Luz del Mundo, whose date will later be fixed to August 14, the founder's birthday. Eventually, the Santa Cena will evolve into an international and spectacular mass religious ceremony. But oh my God, as we saw in the other videos, I remember how Massimo Introvigne was writing about the Santa Cena and how he had attended and viewed the welcoming ceremony. And then he's writing about how there was a bunch of people at the event overall for the week, but he mentioned how he was just there for the welcome ceremony, and the rest of the week he wasn't fucking there. And this is like a whole other year later, 2 years removed from some of his earliest writings on La Luz del Mundo, but his Massimo Intervigne's writing here of La Luz del Mundo is not very good. Oh, what's he talking about here? So, what I mean is, like, what's he talking about here? Like, he wasn't even at the Santa Cena that he claimed that he was at. Like, he was just at a welcoming ceremony. And like, does this guy really have the insight that La Luz del Mundo wants, or is he just there as a tool, as a ploy, as a apparatus through which to launder the reputation of the church, to make it seem more legitimate, to make it seem more mainstream, to make it seem different, non-Catholic, sort of against the grain, but still not seem so weird, not seem so culty, not seem so closed off and isolated. So let's continue reading. There's women as deaconesses. In 1938, the construction of a larger place of worship started in Calle 12 de Octubre in the southeastern sector of Guadalajara, known as Reforma. In the same year, Aaron asked to be baptized again in the name of Jesus, only, having been reminded during evangelist trip to Monterrey that in his first baptism, a Trinitarian formula had been used by Silas rather than the oneness formula mentioning Jesus only. So here they're talking about how Aaron was baptized at one point before, but then now that he has started this whole other group, his idea of baptism and what gets to be invoked and whatever else has changed. And so he changes, and so he has a new baptism. And here, Massimo Introvigne says, by the early 1940s, La Luz del Mundo had 130 congregations in Mexico with some 2,000 followers. So that's interesting. That is a good chunk of people, I guess, by the early 1940s. But 138 congregations is kind of like a lot, and it is surprising that there's so many people there. But look at this and think about it. I'm not really going to even dispute this. I don't have anything to say about this other than I want to remember it. But then again, later, I'm also thinking of all these other claims of big numbers within the past 5 years and within the past, 15, 20 years. These numbers here on screen may be true back then, but the present day numbers are not true. And this at least gives us an idea of how that chart is supposed to look, of how the membership of La Luz del Mundo is supposed to be growing. And think about it. Within this first decade and a half, 2 decades, it only managed to garner 2,000 followers in Mexico, across 130 congregations. So let's continue reading. Several of the first members of La Luz del Mundo came from different branches of Mexican oneness Pentecostalism, although most were converts from Catholicism. It is not surprising that they imported into Aaron's movement the quarrelsome attitude and the inclination to schism typical of the Pentecostal milieu. Small groups of dissidents left Aaron in 1932 and in 1936. But the largest schism happened in 1942, and it was led by Jose Maria Gonzalez, who had been the first pastor ordained by Aaron. So keep that in mind. Like anyone who's an ex-member of the church, there has been waves of people who have become ex-members going back to the 1930s, going back to like within years of the church being founded. Within years of the church being founded and kind of at a regular pace, through different means, scandals, disagreements over doctrine or whatever else, there have been waves of people who just had some sort of maybe snapping point or period of snapping, and they got out of the church and completely undermined its numbers. So we don't know the numbers of these schisms, but keep that in mind. Like people have been getting out of the church for like a century, and for different reasons, but that there is this also points to the early cultish history of the church, wherein I guess there can be schisms to any church, to any church, to any organization, in kind of like a lot of realms. But it shouldn't be surprising that there's bullshit that happens and that people react in a certain way and leave churches and organizations like this. So Aaron Gonzalez claimed to have been led to. Oh, wait, hold on. Let's talk, not this Gonzalez. Jose Maria Gonzalez, this person who led a schism in 1942. This person claimed to have been led to separate from Aaron and establish his own church called Iglesia del Dios Vivo, Columna y Apoyo de la Verdad, el Buen Pastor, the Good Shepherd, by divine revelation. So this person said they had a divine revelation, and that's why they decided to break La Luz del Mundo. But here Massimo writes, but scholars agree that the schism was largely determined by personality quorums. The casus belli was a celebration by La Luz del Mundo of the anniversary of Aaron's birth. While Gonzalez believed that Christians should not celebrate birthdays, Gonzalez believed that Christians should not celebrate birthdays. So that's kind of like a Jehovah's Witness kind of thing. So in La Luz del Mundo, there are celebrations of birthdays, but say if you're in a group like the Jehovah's Witnesses, then there's a certain attitude towards the celebration of birthdays. But here in the early history of La Luz del Mundo, Massimo Introvigne is describing an instance in which the celebration of Aaron's birthday was a breaking point for these people, and that's why they got out. The structure, style, and music of El Buen Pastor was which also organizes yearly its own Santa Cena, are likely derived from La Luz del Mundo. This schismatic group, which has a, quote, Templo Mayor and San Pedro Toltepec in the state of Mexico appears today as a miniature version of La Luz del Mundo with some 11,000 members. Those who left Aaron in 1942 were around 500. That's a lot. So, that's around like a quarter. That's around like a quarter of the people that were part of La Luz del Mundo in the early 1940s. That's like around 2000. And if 500 people left, that's an entire quarter of the church back then that left and formed their own group, and apparently are some sort of offshoot that kind of is a miniature of it apparently, but whatever. The schism was a serious blow to Aaron. Not only had he lost 25%, as we said, of his followers, including the majority of those who had joined La Luz del Mundo in Mexico City, but the schismatic group had connections in Guadalajara with the authorities and the media. They spread rumors of immoralities in La Luz del Mundo and persuaded the authorities to shut down the temple, although it was soon reopened. Okay. So here, there's just nothing wrong going on in La Luz del Mundo in its early history, but people will spread rumors and whatnot, and we won't get into the veracity of any of that, but they were having issues with Aaron, doctrine wise and otherwise. So Aaron symbolically concluded this time of troubles with a baptism, reporting that he was commanded to do so by the voice of God. He rebaptized himself in July 1943. The pastor had been rebaptized in 1938. Okay. Enthusiasm was restored and the church started growing again. It also started seriously bothering the Catholic establishment, which reacted to the competition by claiming that La Luz del Mundo was simply a political tool created by Caius and was reinforced by his successor as president of Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas. The argument is still repeated today and figured prominently in the anti-La Luz del Mundo campaigns promoted by the Catholic anti-cult priest Flavio Amatuli Valente. I don't know who the hell that is, but here he's talking about how the Catholics just don't like that La Luz del Mundo has ever been growing and that they exist in contrary in a zero-sum game against the Catholic Church. So let's continue reading. No scholar who has studied La Luz del Mundo agrees with this theory. During the tenures of Caius and Cárdenas, Aaron, his family, and his congregations were extremely poor, with no traces of lavish support from the government. While Protestant and other groups received from Caius, Catholic churches confiscated by the government, La Luz del Mundo didn't. So here he's talking about how La Luz del Mundo wasn't benefiting politically that much, like other people say. So probably Caius never even heard of La Luz del Mundo during his time in office, which ended in 1928. Although La Luz del Mundo supported his anti-clerical measures, later the church was somewhat close, but not always nor everywhere, to the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI. Many church members saw it as a legitimate heir to the ideals of the Mexican Revolution and of Benito Juárez, the liberal 19th century president of Mexico who tried to eliminate the privileges of the Catholic Church and is very much appreciated by La Luz del Mundo. And that's true. There is a Benito Juárez school, or if not, like at least two in Hermosa Provincia in Guadalajara. So let's keep reading. But neither Caius nor the PRI were crucial for the success of La Luz del Mundo, although some local civil authorities in Guadalajara sometimes protected Aaron against Catholic opposition. Okay. They did so because of the stated Mexicanness and patriotic attitude of La Luz del Mundo, and also because the new church demonstrably improved the conditions of its members. They did not drink alcohol, thus avoiding the problems of drunkenness prevailing in many poor households in the region. They believed in honesty, health, literacy, and education. It is not surprising that the city fathers in Guadalajara looked favorably to Aaron's proposal to establish a colonia in an underdeveloped part of the city that would be inhabited by La Luz del Mundo members. So here he's talking about the sort of origins of Hermosa Provincia, wherein members that were part of the church were known to have some sort of nice patriotic attitude of their Mexicanness, and that they did not indulge in any vices like drinking alcohol or whatnot, but and that they believe in honesty, health, literacy, and education. That's kind of vague, but basically here he's talking about how the government could look nicely to the community and try to give it some sort of land to populate and have it be some sort of nice place. So church members that had already developed a tendency to gather together, and several had purchased homes near the temple of 12 de Octubre, but they remained a minority there and were frequently vilified and even assaulted by their Catholic neighbors. Aaron thus took advantage of the city council politics, fraccionamientos, acquiring land in the east of Guadalajara city center, obtaining the zoning authorizations to build a fully fledged colonia was not easy, but a permission to start building was granted in 1954. So this is the start of Hermosa Provincia. Beautiful province was born as a colony for the children of God, built around a new temple, and in 1957, the municipal authorities visited it for the dedication and its entrance of a monument to Benito Juarez, celebrating the 100th anniversary of his liberal constitution of 1857. Okay. There were further skirmishes with city bureaucrats reconstructed in great detail in the doctoral dissertation of Jason Dormandy to obtain further authorizations and implement the basic services in Hermosa Provincia, but in the end, Aaron's dream became a reality. So I actually want to read this now that I think about it. Dormandy. The Hermosa Provincia was an autonomous, self-sufficient microcity, and one where criminality and illiteracy were rarer than in other parts of Guadalajara. Illiteracy will completely disappear from the provincia shortly after Aaron's death. Okay. He's just talking about the starts of Hermosa Provincia and wiping out illiteracy and whatnot. Local media reported that the white flag signaling in Mexico that illiteracy had completely removed. Anyways, Aaron could thus devote his later years to spread La Luz del Mundo throughout Mexico and beyond, in Central America and in the United States, inaugurating giras apostólicas, so apostolic tours. Aaron was the first apostle in La Luz del Mundo, and so he's kind of the first person to go around doing tours. So let's move on. Aaron died on June 9th, 1964, leaving behind a church with some 12,000 members, according to Moran Quiroz, 1990. But also Massimo cites this other person, Greenway, and he says that the members around that time in 1964 were 20,000. So Massimo Introvigne doesn't know how many members there were in La Luz del Mundo in 1946 when Aaron passed away. But the estimate around that time is like 12,000 to 20,000. We don't know if the people he is citing are church members themselves, are church historians themselves, which he apparently should know. But keep this in mind that in 1964 the members were around like 10,000 to 20,000. Back in 1942, the members were around like 2,000. So there has been growth, like 10 times growth ish, maybe at most, within those 20 years. But let's just keep those numbers in mind. Like even La Luz del Mundo was so small back then, and yet it has this sort of place within Mexican society, and it continues to hold it to an extent. But I just like keeping these numbers in mind, and I'm not going to dispute them, but there is a large gap here that is interesting, and I would reckon that there were, I guess, around like 5 digits of people somewhere around the lower 5 digits. Catholic opposition pursued him even after his death, opposing his burial in Guadalajara cemeteries. It was a testament to the good relations of La Luz del Mundo that had developed with the authorities that the governor of Jalisco, Juan Gil Preciado, personally granted the authorization for a burial in the garden in front of the temple, for which a request for use as a cemetery had already been submitted some months before, which was renamed as Getsemani. So where Aaron is buried now, that is kind of unique because it was the permission for doing such a thing was kind of new back then, is what he's talking about. What happened? So the next segment is leading an international church, Apostle Samuel Joaquin Flores. Okay. What happened in the aftermath of Aaron's death was crucial for La Luz del Mundo and its identity. The apostle of God was dead. After it was announced, a pastor commented that, quote, the Lamb of Israel was quenched. The crowd shouted that no, it was not quenched, and one church leader renowned for his gift of prophecy indicated that there was indeed a new living apostle, the 7th child and second surviving male heir of Aaron, Samuel Joaquin Flores. So Samuel Joaquin Flores is not the oldest child of Aaron. He is the 7th child, and this person is the second surviving male heir of Aaron. So, yeah. And basically, they point that out because, as Massimo writes in the next paragraph, there was no prearranged protocol on how a new apostle would be designated after Aaron's death.
Some early accounts insisted on signs showing that Aaron knew that his successor would be Samuel, but there is no principle of dynastic succession in La Luz del Mundo. If there was, it would have privileged Samuel's brother Santiago, who was also active in the church and was almost 7 years his elder. I don't know Santiago. I can't picture this person. I knew Samuel had other brothers, and but here, he's just saying that Samuel's not the oldest of Aaron, and so it's not like there were prearranged protocol for shuffling Samuel into the place of Aaron after he died. But yeah, there was no democratic election either for who the new leader of La Luz del Mundo would be. But he continues to write, the voice of God speaks to some church leaders who proclaim who is called to be the new apostle, and the crowd assembled in Guadalajara shares the same inner feelings and loudly affirms the election. This is what the election is. Like, some people have let's keep reading instead. The procedure may seem opaque to some scholars, but from the point of view of La Luz del Mundo, it guarantees that apostles are designated by God rather than humans. Here, Massimo Introvigne is just kind of writing about how people believe in the election and kind of view it. Someone may die, and then other people may have a sort of vision that kind of hints, and then that sort of catches fire within church members, and they all affirm loudly their belief in the election. But basically, they're saying that there is a succession of leaders. There's a line of leaders, but the way in which those people come there is not through inheritance, but rather through this opaque, process wherein they're appointed by God and not by humans themselves. There's no election, there's no voting or designation. Samuel was born in Guadalajara on February 14th, 1937. According to La Luz del Mundo, to their official narrative, he was a stillborn, and he was miraculously resurrected by his father. The same source claims that Aaron had previously resurrected his daughter Rebecca, after she had suffered a fatal accident. The church also believes that in 1961, when he was pastor of La Luz del Mundo community in Veracruz, the same voice of God who had spoken to Aaron recited to Samuel the passage of Revelation 10, mentioning a, quote, mighty angel coming down from heaven, and told him, you will be this angel. 1 year later, in 1962, Samuel married Eva Garcia Lopez in Hermosa Provincia Temple. So he's not apostle yet, but he got married in 1962, and he apparently had this his revelation happen to him in 1961. He's still years away from being the apostle, but okay. Samuel inherited a healthy organization whose size was still limited if compared to the million-strong Catholic Church in Mexico. Was there a million people, a million Catholics in Mexico in 1962? Because I feel like there's a lot of millions of people now in Mexico. And if there was just a million in 1962, this seems like fuzzy in terms of the number it's trying to give. But even then, compare that, let's say it's just 1 million or 2 million or whatever of Catholics in Mexico in 1962. Compare that to the around 20,000 to 10,000 La Luz del Mundo members. That's still so small. It's that that gulf is so large. But then actually that million Catholic members in Mexico number has to be much larger, and that only speaks to how much smaller La Luz del Mundo continued to be back then, and even still now in the present day. So the latter became a well-serviced part of Guadalajara with a secondary school, a private university, and a hospital. Samuel also presided over the beautification of the main roads and the demolition of the first temple, replaced by a larger one in 1969. This was in turn dismantled in 1982 and rebuilt in one of two satellite colonias inhabited by La Luz del Mundo members in Guadalajara, known as Betel. In 1983, the construction of a magnificent new temple inaugurated in 1992 was started. This 7-level flagship La Luz del Mundo structure with a capacity of 12,000 was designated by Mexican architect Leopoldo Fernandez Font. And it both symbolized the church's achievements and opened the way to several other architecturally noticeable temples built both in Mexico and abroad. So that's just how the main church was built, the big wedding cake looking thing. Samuel, as is typical of the second leaders in new religious organizations, also better constructed the church, creating a number of ministries for different fields of activities, from education to public relations, and regulated the relations between different levels of ministers, with pastors at the top, followed by deacons, and so on and so on. In 2010, Samuel organized a council of bishops, which, in case of need, could take decisions in the absence of the apostle, yet remain clearly subordinated to the apostle himself. So when Nathan Joaquin is arrested in June 2019, there is a council of bishops that gives the announcement of that arrest, and gives further instructions to the church members to not read the news, to only keep them as the official fountain of information. Keep in mind that the council of bishops is relatively new in La Luz del Mundo, where the hierarchy looked different back prior to them, because when they come along, they don't come along until 2010, and there's some sort of like Congress or some sort of, not legislative body, but there's some sort of group that is a substrate under the main head executive president of La Luz del Mundo, which is Nason Joaquin. But not at the time. At the time it's Samuel, but then this group is founded in 2010, and then of course later Nason, when he comes into power, he works in conjunction with this council of bishops, which is still around today. So keep that in mind, that the council of bishops is still relatively new, and has not been a staple in La Luz del Mundo for its entirety. Finally, Samuel promoted the historical study of Aaron and the origins of La Luz del Mundo at a time when the growing church had started being investigated by Mexican scholars whose approach church members did not always appreciate. Okay. And here, let me say, I'm looking for this piece. I'm looking for this piece by Elsa Lopez Maldonado. Elsa Lopez Maldonado in 1995 published some sort of thing, which, as is written here, which criticizes René de la Torre, their book called Los Hijos de la Luz from 1990. I have read René de la Torre. I highly recommend it. I'm looking for Lopez Maldonado's response to that, which I think is some sort of official-ish response by the church to this book by René de la Torre, which is not written, which doesn't write very favorably about the church, all the time. But I point this out because I'm looking for this. Let me know if you happen to have this. This is from the 1990s. I think it's a pamphlet. I think it's some sort of ephemeral piece of publication rather than like a full solid book like René de la Torre. But let me know what you think. I need to find this. So, armed with a stronger structure at home, Samuel multiplied the apostolic trips. He increased international missionary activism, and in his death, La Luz del Mundo had expanded well beyond the Americas to 50 countries, and it claimed more than 4 million members as a fruit of 50 years of the Second Apostles' mission. What the fuck is 4 million members? In 2014, when he dies, there's supposedly 4 million members. So look, the claim of La Luz del Mundo having 5 million members has been around since prior to 2014. It has been around since like the 1990s. It has been, and then let's say it gained more life in the 2000s, and even though church members may have some sort of repression of the church growing, it's kind of weird that the 5 million member claim has been basically circulating around for like a decade prior to this. And here, this guy is writing that in 2014 there were 4 million members of La Luz del Mundo around the world. I don't even think that's ever been true. I don't even think that there's ever been 4 million members of La Luz del Mundo. But keep in mind, just keep in mind how wishy-washy Massimo Introvigne himself is with his numbers. He's writing about 2014 right now, but then go refer to my other videos where I talk about these articles where he and other people write about La Luz del Mundo and they give numbers and whatever else. But this is such a dramatic jump from 1964. From 1964, we have like 20,000 people, and then up to 2014. So basically, 50 years later, the church grows from 20,000 to 10,000 ish people to 4 million members supposedly. But I I don't know. I just, think about this. You picture these numbers along in your head, hold them together, and just see how there are certain holes here, or there is like certain um, laundering of legitimization of statistics and faux counting and whatever else. This is strange. I read this and I find it quite strange to go through and to process. Okay. Also, another thing, and this is the last thing I want to say about this, is that this La Luz del Mundo being present in La Luz del Mundo being present in 50 countries, I don't dispute this. I think that is true. I have a much harder time disputing the claims of how many countries La Luz del Mundo is present in, because this number is actually easy to inflate, and that you can just get like a group of 3, 4 Mexicans, convince them to go to Equatorial Guinea to establish a church there, and help them establish it. And then you can just basically say that you're just present in another country. That's easy to do. What's not easy is to grow the La Luz del Mundo to however many members it has upwards in the present day, or has ever had in any day in its history. But look, I'm not going to dispute that La Luz del Mundo certainly did grow and may have had some sort of what can be maybe described as exponential or some sort of upward trajectory growth. But it's interesting when these numbers get dropped. They get more interesting as the church gets larger, because it certainly had grown and it's multiplied, but to so many few extents. And even a number like this, I would just highly dispute. But a number like this other one, I wouldn't. And that's kind of precisely the point of why it's here. Is because putting a number like this is very impressive. No La Luz del Mundo member can probably tell you how many countries there are in the world, because kind of no person can really tell you. Any given person can give you their number of what they count as a country or not, but like there's around like 200-ish, let's say. And so when you give a number like this, it's just it only does so much. It only does so much. And actually now in the present day, since 2014, La Luz del Mundo is present in like 60 countries. I've heard that number and I don't dispute it. Since 2014, in the past decade, it's gone up to from 50 countries to like 60 countries. And I don't dispute that, but still, that is a number, that is a statistic that can just be kind of artificially inflated. It's hard to do it, but it can be done. And it's useful to do precisely because the other numbers are wishy-washy. And again, going into the future, it's been 5 years since Nason Joaquin has been arrested, and it's been 2 years since he was convicted and sentenced and all that stuff. And you are not, think about that. It has been there, all that time has passed by, and that yet, when is it that the La Luz del Mundo church members, Nicolas Menchaca or whoever else, is going to come out, Elias Gutierrez, when are these people going to come out and say that the church has 6 million members now? Or actually, we surpassed that. We grew exponentially, and we've reached 7 million, etc. When is it that that's going to happen? I don't think it's going to happen. But stay alert for such a thing. Catholic opposition in Mexico also continued, but the most vehement reaction to the expansion that converted La Luz del Mundo into one of the fastest growing religions in the world came from Protestant anti-cultists. A bizarre character, Jorge Ederly Graham, accused Samuel of sexual abuse and of preparing a mass suicide in 1997, some days after the suicides of members of the American UFO movement Heaven's Gate in Rancho Santa Fe, California. Ederly was part of evangelical anti-cult organization group Instituto Cristiano de Mexico, but was also being accused of leading himself a cult, the Iglesia Cristiana Restaurada. The latter operated hostels for problematic children, and from where several minors disappeared in 2009. What the fuck is he fucking talking about? I don't know who this person is. We'll learn about him, I guess, at some point. But I don't know who this fucking person is. And if anything, I think the main name to mention in 1997 is Moises Padilla and what happened to him. And is that like tied to what this is? I don't know, but you wouldn't learn that here, because that's not what Massimo Introvigne is solicited here to do. But yeah, here he's talking about how there was accusations of sexual abuse against Samuel back then, but they're just from this kooky guy, and they're not real. Anyways, nonetheless, there were media that took seriously his accusations against Samuel, supported by some ex-members of La Luz del Mundo who filed complaints with the state prosecutor in Jalisco, who did not find that there was any offense to prosecute. Okay, these attacks did not slow the growth of La Luz del Mundo at the time. At the Santa Cena of 2007, Samuel, so 10 years later, I guess, Samuel announced that he had some health problems that may make him less present in the church official public activities. He remained a beloved figure for La Luz del Mundo community, which offered fervent prayers for his health. He died in Guadalajara on December 8, 2014. What do you mean he remained a beloved figure for the church since announcing he was ill in 2007, and then later died in 2014? He's the fucking apostle. Like, well, where's he gonna fucking go? Like the power and authority is so concentrated in the one guy, and Massimo here is writing as if like that isn't happening. He's given this sort of he's giving the sort of history of the passing of power and the growth of the church and leadership and whatnot, but at no point is he talking about the magic powers that La Luz del Mundo members are taught to believe that Samuel had, that Aaron had, that Nathan has in the present day. Here he's not talking about the magic powers or not. He's just talking about the growth of the church and that being some sort of sign of success of its growth, and some being some sort of sign of its veracity, of its truthfulness, of its legitimacy. And what do you mean that Samuel, like, is he implying that Samuel, here's what I'm saying, is he implying that Samuel could announce that he had health problems and then he would be phased out, or like he wouldn't become a part of he was always a beloved figure of the church, kind of by default, through the avenue of the doctrine? Like, is he supposed to, I don't want to linger on this too long, but like this was like a weird, stupid instance of like writing, and like I don't get what anyone who is not a learned member of La Luz del Mundo and really knows it for what it is can read this and maybe not be confused by it, but like if you do know what they stand for, and if you're worth your salt of, like, if you're worth your criticism of La Luz del Mundo salt, if you're worth that, you would recognize that this is funky. This is like a weird piece of funky writing. Like he's always been beloved and continues to be, although he's dead as fuck. But like, yeah, it's just really strange. Okay, let's keep going. In dissertation defended in 2016 at the University of Guadalajara, directed by sociologist René de la Torre Castellanos, one of the first scholars to pay attention to La Luz del Mundo, Noe Alejandro Torres Alvarez, offered a detailed reconstruction of the llamamiento apostólico of Samuel's successor. So this is weird because René de la Torre, he's Máximo Introvigne has cited René de la Torre. The book is Los Hijos de la Luz from 1990, and that is a history of the church, not written by a church member, and it can be kind of scathing. It's not nice, and it's not a puff piece like this is that Introvigne is writing. But yeah, there's a dissertation in 2016 directed by René de la Torre, and then their students. Noe Alejandro Torres Alvarez is the person that wrote the dissertation. This person gives a portrayal of the llamamiento apostólico of Samuel's successor, it's weird. It's weird that he has undermined René de la Torre in previous paragraphs here. He's citing this person and then writing in contrast to them. But then here he's going to cite that person's student and their work on this instance of the llamamiento apostólico. But then also it's weird that this person, again, go back to Introvigne. Introvigne is not a fucking church member. But yet here he is, citing another person who is not a church member. And then this person's going to give, I don't think Noe is a church member, but if we take that as a given, more than likely, then that person is like, why is that person? It's weird. This is a weird like muddling of what happened. But okay, let's get into what happened. So let's keep reading. What for the devotees was God's choice fell on Nathan Joaquin Garcia, the fifth of Samuel's 8 children. So he's not the oldest. Nason was born in Guadalajara on May 7, 1969. According to Torres Alvarez, the choice was both expected and unexpected. On the one hand, Nason had been a close aide to his father, and Nason's son, Adoraim, is in one of the sermons pronounced during Samuel's funerals, reported a dream where God gave special signs of election to both his father and himself. Okay. Torres Alvarez believes that Adoraim was thus offering a clue that Nason may be the next apostle, and perhaps himself will one day succeed his father. But La Luz del Mundo members believe that this interpretation is purely conjectural. Then why fucking mention it? It's weird. Then like why fucking mention it at all? Like you yourself are not a church member, but you're here to launder the church's reputation and its history and to explain whatever and to make it seem like it's growing at every point in time. But here, this paragraph is interesting in that this is a guy who's like citing the student of someone who has not written very favorably about the church in the past. But yet, these people here are going to be like the people to cite and to talk about the event. Why not just describe the event yourself? Like if you're close to the church members and who was there at the fucking time, and you've taken pictures with Nathan in the first place, then like why not just talk to him? Why not just have Aaron? Why not just have Nathan write this chapter? He doesn't fucking do anything, right? This man just tours, and this man just grows the group and provides some sort of face for it and whatnot. And he's hyped up left and right, when he comes into power. But and he's always been close to the church and whatnot. It's just strange that we have to read through these hoops to try to get at what's real. And you won't get at what's real because you'll have to get it elsewhere. But when you read this, there's a stark contrast between what is written here and how the church is portrayed, and how that is contrasted to what is actually really happening. Continue. On the other hand, I'm just going to keep reading. On the other hand, Nason himself did not have a prominent role in his father's funerals, and within the Joaquin family itself, there are uncertainties about whom God may choose. Why is Massimo writing this? I don't. He's just trying to fend off the idea that there is succession within the church, within the Joaquin family, which is just plainly true. But he's trying to like hedge against that. He's trying to sort of write and qualify that. Finally, one pastor, Gilberto Garcia, on December 14th, told the multitude gathered to honor the deceased apostle that, quote, a sister from the church had a dream where she saw Samuel rising to heaven and told him, "Don't go, we need an apostle." Then she saw another man coming down from the clouds, but could not distinguish his face. Finally, she heard a voice proclaiming, "Nason is my choice." The revelation was immediately greeted by jubilation and prayers by the church, and they accepted Nason himself and his siblings as genuine. Okay, so like it's weird because this is true. It is Gilberto Garcia that gets up, to talk to the church at like 2-3 in the morning, or whenever that was on December 14th, because let me give you the details. The details is that Samuel dies on like December 7th or 8th or something like that. And then it is Nathan that becomes apostle on December 14th. So Samuel dies, and then for like a week, there's the idea is that there is no apostle because Samuel died. And then there is a week of like mourning, there's a week of gathering in Hermosa Provincia in Guadalajara. And then by December 14th, that is when the funeral is planned, and that had been announced for like several days. So by December 14th, there was the funeral, and that happens later that day. But at 2-3 in the morning, when that day begins, there is a gathering at the church, and Gilberto Garcia gets up at some point, and he starts talking about how this supposed sister had a vision. He reports this. Everyone, jumps in jubilation and agreement and in prayer and whatever else. And there's video of this, and you can watch this. But like, it's strange that why isn't that sister? Why can't that person be named? why these, and he's sort of describing this like theatrics to how to deliver the message of like, hey, succession goes to Nathan. And here he could also talk about how Nathan is not the oldest of Samuel, and how Samuel was not the oldest of 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 his father, of Aaron, and how that is supposed to be some sort of hedging or proof that that the apostleship is not passed down um as something of inheritance within La Luz del Mundo. There has to be this sort of air or veneer or appearance of God running the whole thing ultimately, and not human beings running the whole thing. Because the reality is that there's human beings running the whole thing, and that there are these sort of plots and theatrics that go along with convincing a bunch of people that this religious that this thing of religious important of that this thing of religious importance is going on. Yeah. So yeah, Nathan is apparently accepted as the next apostle, and as we know, in that event, that guy is up there on the stage, hugging his siblings. His siblings are standing next to him. He stands at the podium where Samuel used to stand. So he takes that seat, and so by way of doing that, that guy ends up inheriting all the seats, all the thrones, not to say it like snidely, but all the thrones, all the fancy chairs that he has that are exclusively his, and all the temples around the church around the world. It was at that point that he inherits that one and all the other ones. And here Massimo says, I have supplemented through personal interviews of eyewitnesses at the event. So he here he's describing the event, citing Torres Alvarez, and then he's also talking about how he knows through eyewitnesses that this is how the event went down. And he doesn't talk about the video, but the video exists, and we can all watch that. So, but yeah, that is what happens. So let's keep reading. La Luz del Mundo insists that there are never substantial changes from one apostle to the next, as the church is the faithful custodian of the original message of God, that God entrusted Aaron with. In a fundamental way, this is true. The church remains very much the same, including in its dressing codes, conservative for men who more often than not wear jackets and ties, as well as for women who display their long skirts and cover their heads with a veil in the temples. There's a sharp contrast here where, like, yeah, there is a dress code for the women, but it's not just that the men, have jackets and ties, which, yeah, they can, but that's not the standard, really. That's not really the standard. And even then, that is not as strenuous as women wearing long skirts all the time from like their teenage years and upwards to, from like their teenage years when they're children, and then upwards to adulthood, and then like the rest of their adulthood. And then also when they're wearing veils inside of the temple, that also is markedly different from the way that men have to conduct themselves, that present themselves, and all that stuff in church. They're not always wearing fancy clothes, but the women are always wearing long skirts and whatnot. So let's move on. A University of Florida 2017 dissertation by Mary Puckett had the disadvantage of being based on fieldwork conducted mostly in Florida, where La Luz del Mundo communities are comparatively small. Although she did go to a Santa Cena with devotees traveling from Orlando, Florida. The Florida microcosm may not be entirely representative of the larger international La Luz del Mundo. Yet, Puckett tells a convincing tale about the globalization, or perhaps as she refers, cosmopolitanization of La Luz del Mundo in the first years of Nathan's apostolate, in his term as apostle. A church that once based its identity on being Mexican is now a church with an identity that transcends national borders today. That transcends national borders. Today, it is a church for the world. Puckett discusses how Nathan, continuing in Samuel's footsteps, managed to accomplish this between 2014 and 2017. He successfully mobilized the church's youth, both in Mexico and abroad, particularly in the United States, where La Luz del Mundo has experienced a spectacular growth. Youth members enthusiastically joined the battalions, taking the faith to new cities and new countries. New churches were mushrooming in the US and Central America, and several new countries were reached. By 2019, La Luz del Mundo was present in some 60 countries and claiming 50 million members internationally. Although statistics about new religious movements are always a matter of controversy. Just give us the numbers. So he's given us numbers here, but as we observed in other writings of Massimo Introvigne on the topic of La Luz del Mundo, and in particular its growth, it's weird that he has these numbers here, but he's just always hedging it with all those statistics about new religious movements are always a matter of controversy. He sort of just qualifies the whole thing, but let's go back to this. So I've read this dissertation by Mary Puckett. It is quite interesting. I would recommend it. I do. It is basically based around the cosmopolitanization of La Luz del Mundo, and it is quite captivating in that I've said before it is a sort of time capsule. It was defended in 2017, and that's a number of years. It is a sort of time capsule of the church after Samuel passes away and once Nathan comes into power. It pictures the church. It is based on field work, interviews and other contact with La Luz del Mundo churches and whatnot in Florida, which is not Texas, which is not California, which is not many of the other states in Mexico, but and is not any of the other countries that La Luz del Mundo is based in. But even though it is kind of based and housed or coming from the perspective of the communities in Florida, I don't think it's bad, and it is accurate, and it comes from a useful perspective, and it provides a useful perspective on the church at the time, because it is a time capsule. It captures the church in from 2014 to 2017, as we see here, and it captures it at this moment of rejuvenation with Nathan coming to power. Samuel goes away. That dude is too old. He's grown the church tremendously, right? But this dude is old and he's been sick for like many years. Nathan comes in. This guy is younger. He's like in his 40s at the time. He's not like Samuel, who was in his mid 20s or mid to late 20s when he became apostle after Aaron. But Nathan is somewhere in his 40s or close to 50. I don't care. So, somewhere there. And he comes into power, and he is a sort of rejuvenation of the church. And Mary Puckett rightfully portrays that sort of moment of the church, and about how they joined battalions and how people were going to new countries. And here in 2019, it's so strange. By 2019 is when he says that the church reached 5 million members. This is when Massimo Introvigne says it. And that the church is present in some 60 countries, which, compared to the 50 countries that La Luz del Mundo was present in around the time of Samuel's death in 2014, like 5 years earlier, it was around like 50-ish, but now it's around 60. And again, I'm not going to debate that number because it's easy. Yeah, it's not easy, but all that one has to do is to gather these sort of battalions, raise the enthusiasm, and then send some people off to Finland or Pakistan or to Mongolia or somewhere, and then just claim that country is conquered for the church, or that a stake has been claimed there. And in fact, no stake can be claimed at these churches, and you can just send the members over there and just claim that the church is present there, and you can inflate this number, the 60, but this number of 5 million is harder to inflate, and it's harder to be proven, but then and harder to quantify, to picture, to chart, to portray, to track at different points in time. But Massimo Introvigne doesn't fucking care, because ultimately he says that although statistics about new religious movements are a matter of controversy anyways, given that they're a matter of controversy anyways, then what's the point in tracking the church and being truthful about how many members it has? Because again, right here, Massimo is saying that the church has reached 5 million members in 2019, and that Luz Del Mundo spokespeople were saying that at that time. They were saying that at that time. Silem Garcia, other people at whatever podium or in whatever venue would also say that there are 5 million members around the church, of the church around the world, and that was basically the given, for these people when going out to speak about the church. But again, as I have said and as I've talked about, this claim has been going around for like decades, even prior to 2019. But Massimo Introvigne says that he comes to this number at this point and in 2019. And in this journal, we're not getting any charts. We get no charts, we get no sort of census, we get no, and we don't get any of that. But we just have these numbers here that he says, and that come with no citation. He has been citing other stuff, but here you have no citation in this paragraph, nor at any other critical points in this work. The church is globalizing, the church is growing, the church is embracing various whatevers, is what he's talking about here. And Mary Puckett's work, which I've spoken to Mary Puckett. I spoke to her recently. This is a good dissertation in that, it doesn't talk about Nason and all the past 5 years of controversy, but it is a very useful like time capsule or sort of primer for before all that controversy, because it gathers the church at a certain moment when the enthusiasm is kind of high, the consolidation of power, of encouragement and whatnot is high. Nason is going on all these tours everywhere, and it captures and people are being sent left and right. Young people are being gathered into groups and sent left and right to within their own countries, outside of their own countries. People's documentation and immigration status is being perhaps taken advantage of, and they are used to be sent elsewhere from outside of the U.S. and being sent elsewhere as missionaries and taking advantage of people's immigration statuses in order to advance, again, the common interest of the church as they are centralized around Nason and the other higher ups in the organization. I hope all that makes sense. So it captures the church at a certain point, and it's very interesting to like read that, to like, let's say, like read that dissertation one afternoon, or just in however long it takes you to read it, and then later on going into the documentaries from HBO, going into the documentaries from Hulu, Univision, etc., and seeing how the bottom gave out, to La Luz del Mundo, where so much power and just everything was concentrated on Nason, that the dude, through his corruption and abuses of his power, did what he did, and that just kind of really gave blew under La Luz del Mundo, and it has been on a complete like downward trajectory since then. And yeah, that's something that's kind of mostly what I want to say about that work. I highly recommend that to read too, and that is also easy to find online. Let me know if you want it, or if you want some other document, like I guess this one. But yeah, let me know what you think. Massimo Introvigne goes on. This was an internet savvy generation, and Nason worked with them to build an effective group of state-of-the-art web evangelism. He promoted Berea Internacional as an effective tool to broadcast church news. This resulted in further expansion, and also, as Puckett argues, guaranteed that globalization would not compromise the integrity of the message. Internet communication worked both ways. It allowed communities throughout the world to receive messages from the headquarters, Guadalajara, Hermosa Provincia, but it also allowed those same headquarters to check out what is going on even in the most remote branches. Crazy. It's so the technological component of the of that work is cool, and I think in fact I kind of want it to be more panopticon-y. I want it to be, I wish, I that's probably something I would read back in Mary Puckett's work, is about the use of technology and this sort of monitoring dynamic that is going on, and the integrity of the message and whatnot. This was such an interesting component of Mary Puckett's dissertation, and I actually wished it was more I don't want to say dystopian, but kind of spooky, or if that sort of language could be amped up more, or I'm not even entirely sure of what I want to say yet, but yeah, that is an interesting component of this. And this, I'm glad that this is clear to Massimo Introvigne, but it's also kind of tragic because this guy's not a member of this church. This guy doesn't believe in all the beliefs that all these people have within the church, and that are supposed real believers of this church. But yeah, this guy is like aware of how the power dynamics work, and here he's laundering the reputation of the church, and like not speaking very badly about it in the way I think he should be, but here he is just kind of talking nicely about the church and not being so pressing and scholarly on it. Okay, I say let's finish this. I just keep going. I've spent more time on this than I thought I would, but I hope that this has been useful and interesting. And I'm just gonna finish this last page here that we have for Massimo Introvigne. This would look like an impeachable success story of church growth if it was not for the fact that in 2019, La Luz del Mundo acquired an overnight international notoriety that it would have gladly avoided. It's very ironic. It's really funny. Of course, La Luz del Mundo would have gladly avoided it. But what the fuck? Like, of course, La Luz del Mundo would have gladly avoided it. But also, it also probably could not have, because so much power and authority and belief and whatnot is centralized around Nason Joaquin, that like if there was going to be the conditions for corruption and abuse of power, and if they were going to inevitably happen, then like then that was going to kind of seem inevitable, because so much power would be centralized around one person that they could have abused it. And it's strange because all it took was one person for this flood to happen, for this flood that it could have gladly avoided, but it's the entire community that is affected by it. And all it took was just one person and all the power concentrated in them to end up being corrupt and doing wrong with it and abusing. And then like he says here, on June 3rd, 2019, that's a Monday, Nason was arrested when he landed at Los Angeles airport, and he was detained with several accusations of sexual abuse, including of minors, together with two female associates. A third escaped arrest. None of the other people are named. Azalea Rangel Melendez is a person that escaped arrest, continues to be in hiding to this day. Maybe they're dead. We don't know. We don't know where they're at. Maybe they're in Mexico and they're hiding. Maybe by force. We don't even know. But yeah, that person is not named here. And the other two people that Nason was arrested with, that were named in the documents, in the prosecution documents, those two people are Alondra Ocampo and Susana Medina Oaxaca. Those two people were arrested. Susana Medina Oaxaca was with Nason at the airport when they got off the plane, a private flight, and she was arrested along with him, and he had a briefcase and whatever else. But Alondra Ocampo, she was at her place of work, I believe in Los Angeles, and she was somewhere in Los Angeles, and she was arrested and then taken into custody. But yeah, those people don't get named, but those people are members. Those people are members of the church. Like, not your common member of the church, because they're apparently close to Nason, and close enough that the law will try to bundle them together in a prosecutory process. But the thing is that here Massimo Introvigne just talks about them as not accusations, but where's the word? As associates. He just calls them like associates, but no, they're not associates. Here's the word. They're not just associates of Nason. They are introduced to people as like, oh, they're his dietitians, or they are his secretaries, or his assistants with his bags at the airport or something like that. Like Massimo is being careful with his words here, and just and being and like just recognize that. And here Massimo goes on to say, it would be inappropriate to comment on a pending case, and no one and one where so far the prosecutors have not revealed the exact extent of the accusations, who the alleged victims are, and what evidence corroborates their allegations. So he says, he says he's not going to comment on the case, but he is going to point out that the prosecutors have not revealed the exact extent of the accusations. But also, when this comes out, when this is published, it is literally March, April 2020. The guy is still arrested. It's still pre-trial. It's still figuring out his bond. It's still looking for Azalea Rangel Melendez, because she still hasn't been found. Back then she hadn't been found for months back then, and then she still hasn't been found now. But but he's not saying that here. He's not pinpointing us somewhere within the process, because it's, again, this is when he's talking, it's still pre-trial, and the guy hasn't even been released. He's still arrested. It's still pre-trial. It's not like the exact extent of the accusations could be fully fledged out yet, as could be in a trial. But but it's weird because he's like, he's just calling everything bizarre, and as if it's some sort of hit job. He takes the same sort of line as like the first couple lawyers that Nathan Joaquin Garcia had at the beginning. He takes this position of this being some sort of kind of hit job. Anyways, Massimo goes on to say, I attended the Santa Cena in both 2018 and 2019, and noticed both that the numbers of participants actually grew from one year to the next, and that in the enormous crowd of 600,000, everybody was ready to proclaim that the apostle was innocent. What does this fucking mean? Well, hold on, because now look, I can't remember exactly if in the video I did prior, if he attended if he said he attended the Santa Cena welcoming ceremony in 2017 or 2018. If you go back to that video, at some point, it's either 2017 or 2018, where this guy says that he went to the Santa Cena, but it's actually just that he went to the welcoming ceremony. He did not stay until the 14th because he had to go to some other thing, to some other thing. Okay. And so here he's saying that he attended the Santa Cena. So, he's saying like the 14th in both 2018 and 2019. Anyways, there's some sort of mismatch or some vagueness or some unclearness or some mistake here, possibly misleading mistake, maybe here between this sentence and what Massimo Introvigne has written in the past about La Luz Del Mundo. But anyways, here let's take him for his word at what he says. I attended the Santa Cena in both 2018 and 2019, and noticed both that the number of participants actually grew from one year to the next, and that in the enormous crowd of 2016, he should be talking about the 2019 Santa Cena. So, and the enormous crowd of 600,000 in August 2019. Massimo says, everybody was ready to proclaim that the apostle was innocent. This was a moving testimony of a solid church confronted with horrific accusations against its leader, yet firm in its faith and trust. Was Massimo Introvigne, like, this is weird. I really want to pick this apart. Is Massimo Introvigne like on a drone floating above Hermosa Provincia, observing everybody's head within the temple somehow, and then all the people's heads in all the churches that radiate outside of the temple, and all those people in the streets, whether they're under tarps or not, whether they're inside of homes or on roofs or wherever, is he just picturing everybody nodding their head at support to signal support for Nason in this criminal case that he is facing in August 2019? I hope I'm making sense here. How is it that this guy can say that, oh, the number of participants grew from one year to the next? He's providing no numbers, exact numbers. He's providing no figures, no like charts, no nothing. He's just gonna kind of sort of say this, He's going to not give a sort of kind of footnote or some sort of proof for this. He's not going to give some sort of aerial drone photo of the event. I don't know what we're looking for to prove and back up the claims that he is making. But the thing is that we don't have them here. And he's just going to kind of sort of say this stuff. And then he's also just going to kind of sort of say that, oh, yeah, 600,000 people, not even the 4 or 5 million people that are apparently part of La Luz del Mundo at this time are attending this event, the most important religious event of the organization, etc., whatever. We could say much more, but like only 600,000 people attended apparently in either 2018 or 2019, whenever. And then like 600,000 wouldn't even be as many people in La Luz del Mundo as there are in Mexico itself. According to the spokespeople of La Luz del Mundo at this time, and in recent years, La Luz del Mundo has like over 1 million members in Mexico. Iñegi in 2021, literally a year from this publication, from this document that we're looking at now, Iñegi, a year from now, says that La Luz del Mundo only has like around 190,000 members, less than 200,000 members in Mexico. But here, Massimo is saying that there was like 600,000 people in Mexico that attended the event. And of course, that's people from outside of Mexico that come in, but like it's like it's strange. There's just such a mismatch of numbers. There's such a weird milieu of like of members, because like sometimes the members are clear and in contrast, and sometimes the members are like very blurry, and I don't understand what line to take, because the line very much zigzags given all the different sources that La Luz del Mundo has on itself and all the different like writing that it has on it. So I hope this makes sense. But also I want to say that he's just taking it as a given, in children included, I guess, right? Because this includes children. He just takes it as a given that like people are present there in Guadalajara. They're attending the event. The dude's in jail. The PR for La Luz del Mundo has been in the fucking shitter for like 2 months, intensely, day by day, hour by hour. And those first 2 months of Nason's arrest in 2019, it's been fucking insane. Just a complete fucking nightmare for the organization. People have been exiting left and right. The Reddit, the XLODM subreddit has grown exponentially. The anti-LLDM content on YouTube has grown exponentially in Spanish and English. There is news coverage just all over the place in Univision and Milenio, etc. The picture is so interesting in the summer of 2019. And I don't know, it's complicated, but Massimo Introvigne says that no, it's not complicated. There's a bunch of fucking people there. All these bunch of fucking people believe that the apostle is innocent. This is all he doesn't say this, but it's also saying, oh, it's just a hit job. This is kind of fake. This has happened to other religious groups before that I've studied, and that this too shall pass. La Luz del Mundo will also survive these sort of controversies, which is kind of funny, because Massimo Introvigne, and this is kind of sinister too, wherein this guy knows that this church is bogus. He knows that La Luz del Mundo is not real. He's not a member, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He knows all these other churches are probably bogus too, because he can't be a part of all of these other churches that he writes about, right? Like, he's very much anti-Catholic, okay, but like the point is that like this guy's not a member, but yet he knows that he's being used to some extent to write nicely about the church, to launder its reputation, to clean it up, to make it seem cool and interesting and whatever else. But yeah, he's also not doing such a spectacular job at that. But then yet also he's playing part in like just like laundering or just perpetuating these like lies, this misleading stuff about the church. He makes no room. It's almost like he's a cult member himself, where he's making no room for legitimacy to leave the group. He's making no signal or gesture. That this is really important. He's making no gesture to say people that leave the group. To him, the situation is zero sum. This church is growing. I can pinpoint a number here. I can pinpoint a number here. I can pinpoint a number all the way over here, closer to us. This church is growing. It's the fastest growing religious movement in the world. Here are my numbers. I'm not going to compare or just basically barely even mention any other group that may have some sort of trajectory as well, impressive trajectory as well. I'm just going to say this group is one of the fastest growing, give them some kind of BS wishy-washy numbers, and then also not talk about like, what does it mean to not be part of that growth, or to be part of that growth and then drop out of it? Because people have, by the time that this is published, and certainly like the day that the dude was arrested, the church numbers, whatever they were, however they can be counted, certainly plummeted, because certainly people in the hundreds, maybe in the thousands, I can't even exactly myself be sure of how to number it myself, but like we all know that the numbers have plummeted, because you from this jumping off point, when are we ever going to hear, and what is the portrayal of La Luz del Mundo going to look like, say in 2026, when are they going to reach 6 million members then? What is the brief history of La Luz del Mundo look like? Can it be brief anymore if it's 100 years and yet the church has not reached some great other milestone that it was supposed to have to, as can be seen in like portrayals of the church prior to Nathan's arrest, because the arrest is so important. The bottom gave out. Anyways, basically it's strange. It's kind of offensive. It's kind of weird. And it's strange that Massimo can just say that, yeah, everyone's just kind of on board that the apostle is innocent. I'm not going to give any more details of like what it means to leave this group, and what even a legitimate avenue of exit looks like for this church. It's strange. And like there's no charts, he's just going to talk numbers, but he's not going to bark out any real like numbers or proof, or just there's something else. There's a lot missing here. So let's keep going. Of course, old and new enemies of La Luz del Mundo painted a different portrait, but their dire predictions about a quick decline of the church after the incident in California did not come true. La Luz del Mundo actually continues to grow and indicates that it has no intention of replacing the apostle, who indeed continues to write letters and take the main decisions of the church from its jail cell. He called the apostle it. La Luz del Mundo continues to and indicates that it has no intention of replacing the apostle, who indeed continues to write letters and take the main decisions for the church from its jail cell. He should be saying his jail cell. Okay. And anyways, again, it's not like they would vote to replace him with someone else. Because it's different in that God supposedly put him in the situation. God decided to put the church and everybody else through this test of their faith in the apostle. What if we smear them with this crazy prosecutorial bullshit? But yeah, this is also strange. This is also some strange like writing too on behalf of Introvigne. And Introvigne's final paragraph: time will tell what the fate of Nathan will be and how the church will react to developments in California. My educated guess is that whatever the outcome of the California case, the church will survive and move towards its 100th anniversary with no substantial loss of its members. Okay, it would not be the first case of a religious movement that has confronted and survived serious crisis and ignominious accusations against its leaders. The end. Massimo Introvigne it's so weird, because the 100th anniversary of the church is in 2026, and he's saying that like right now, when he's writing in 2019 and 2020, that the church is going to reach 2026 triumphantly, and And what do you've never given any, you have no number. You've said numbers about the church and how it's grown and how you can track it from one year to the next and how you've tracked it how you've tracked it many decades in the past. But in the present day, like what do you mean there's no substantial loss of members? Like how is it that you can count that people leave? He recognizes that people leave. And like, how many, like, can he give us an estimate of it? Is it like 1%? Because he's been very fast and loose with his numbers prior. But and those, as we have talked about, have a mismatch with the numbers that other people provide. And some of these numbers I can maybe even take as fact that he's provided. But when it comes to the present day numbers, like he's just saying that there's just no substantial loss of its members. And so then I would ask him, well, like, now that it's been 4 years since this was published, can we say that the La Luz del Mundo will have 6 million members by 2026, 8, 7, etc., 10? I don't know what the exponentiality even looks like. The La Luz del Mundo people are the ones that are supposed to know, but as we've seen and as we've talked about at many points, the numbers can be wishy-washy. And yeah, for sure, the numbers are a matter of controversy. Who I would probably go back and forth with somebody about what counts as a member or not. Someone who goes every Sunday, someone who goes 5 Sundays a year, someone who goes 2-3 times a year just for holidays. I don't know. I don't know what an exact member looks like, but whoever has the bird's eye view, it's not Massimo Introvigne. This man does not have the bird's eye view that he is sort of written as if he does have. If anyone has it, it's the church leaders, and those aren't the people writing this, and those aren't the people the church, the council of bishops, and all those people, the church historians that Massimo was meeting and whatever else. Those are the people writing this and being for the most part, like, cited here. It's him and I don't get it. This next part is our next challenge after a break. Okay, let's continue. That took way longer than I thought, but we'll get through these other parts, and I'll try to skim read more. I hope that this is useful. There are many different points I'm trying to make as I go through this, but I hope that it is a good portrayal or sort of tour through the history and how the church, the history of the church, how the church is trying to make itself look through these avenues, such as CESNUR, this journal. One more thing I want to say prior to moving on to this next piece by J. Gordon Melton is that Massimo Introvigne, in his writing about La Luz del Mundo, it says that other churches have gone through major scandals for its leaders and whatnot, and that they have survived them, and La Luz del Mundo is going to survive its own situation too, as he estimates. But that's still 2 years away from when this is published. But still, nevertheless, it's kind of funny that that La Luz del Mundo is going to try to make itself seem so different from all the other religious churches, and make it seem all the other religious movements, and make it seem so different from Catholicism, and make it seem so unique from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and more truthful than this other group or what have you. And yet when it comes to this guy Massimo Introvigne being brought in to talk about the church and its growth and what his observations about it, which he barely has any, kind of barely just has any observations about it. Even he kind of like makes the church seem like any other church he fucking studies by saying that, like, this scandal, this major wave of motherfucking scandal that has hit La Luz del Mundo, it may seem so crazy. He's not saying this exactly, but it's kind of like he's saying this. He's saying it may seem so crazy to members of La Luz del Mundo right now that they're going through this. But if you're like me and you know about, and you are desensitized to this, and you know that this kind of situation has happened in other groups as well, which of course it has, then you would know that they can kind of survive it. And hey, you guys can kind of survive your thing too. It sort of undermines the fact that if La Luz del Mundo were to survive its scandals of its apostle, then then that's not so much a demonstration of its veracity and truthfulness and its its favorability in the eyes of God, because like all these other fucking groups have like survived and like got through their own scandals and whatnot, you know. I hope that makes sense. This that sort of component of Massimo Introvign's writing is just it's interesting to me. So this next segment from this Journal of CESNUR, we're on page 22. This is chapter 2. It is called The Rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas by J. Gordon Melton. This guy's from Baylor University, Waco, Texas. Here's his email if you want to send him something. Here's the abstract that he writes. This is kind of the summary of his work within a paragraph. I'm going to read the whole thing in its entirety. La Luz del Mundo, a large and relatively new Christian denomination, originated in Mexico in 1926, even as the Roman Catholic religious hegemony was being challenged by a spectrum of Protestant and post-Protestant groups. The new church has complex roots, one being the still relatively new Pentecostal movement, which spread from Los Angeles into Mexico early in the 20th century. La Luz del Mundo was founded by a young Mexican visionary who emerged from an initial contact with God with a unique mission. The Apostle Aaron began to develop his church, La Luz del Mundo, the light of the world, in Guadalajara. It followed a unique vision of Aryan Christianity, which recognized the one God, the Father, and his Son, Jesus Christ, and additionally restored the office of the apostle to its primary role in the church leadership. In 1926, La Luz del Mundo entered Texas, the state where Pentecostalism was receiving its greatest support. In its 60 years of life thereafter, the church has experienced a steady increase in membership year by year. Its success in the state has been capped by the construction of a headquartered temple in Houston. So this is the abstract for J. Gordon Melton's piece on the rise of La Luz del Mundo in Texas. And we're going to go through it. We'll see what I am attracted to, but I'm going to really try to skim through this because some of this history I'm not very interested in, but I do recognize it, I do note it, and it may even have contrast with other sort of histories I'm kind of taking in. And I have yet to really put them side by side, but still, you know, this is useful to some extent, but then to another extent, it's just kind of strange writing. Because again, J. Gordon Melton is not a church member. He's not like Massimo Introvigne. He is not a church member. So, La Luz del Mundo and early Pentecostalism. In 2020, members of La Luz del Mundo, a largely relatively new Christian denomination that originated in Mexico, they celebrated their 60th anniversary of introduction of their church to the state of Texas in 2020. So La Luz del Mundo traces its beginnings. So much paragraph. Parentheses right here. Traces its beginnings to the ministry of Bueno Eusebio Joaquin Gonzalez, a soldier serving in the Mexican army in the mid-1920s. His life would change, etc. He had a Catholic upbringing. He became Protestant. He grew up in a certain social context. He was revealed to God that he was going to be an apostle, etc. Okay, so one stream of history leading to the rise of La Luz del Mundo takes one back to 1905 and the relocation of the Pentecostal founder Charles Fox Parham. So here, Melton is going to talk about this Charles guy and how in 1905 he moved to Texas with Pentecostal non-Catholic ideas. Okay, so here this guy is in Texas. People are, you know, he's talking to non-Catholic people in Texas. His new Pentecostal message was initially proclaimed in Texas among a few people in Orchard, not far from Houston, but then experienced a significant response during a series of meetings okay, so he's just talking about Pentecostalism in Texas, like 2 decades prior to the founding of La Luz del Mundo. That's what he's talking about. Okay, African Americans, Mexican Americans, they were attracted to the religious group. In Los Angeles, there was a religious gathering on Azusa Street. Mexican Americans, connections to them. The happenings at Azusa Street spread internationally. Basically, this sort of idea of Pentecostal religious, you know, practice, etc., is spreading, is what he's talking about. in the city in 1912. It kind of arrives to Mexico. In the mid 1920s, there are several oneness Pentecostal churches under the name Apostolic Church of Faith in Jesus Christ are in northern Mexico. Okay. Antonio Muñoz, San Francisco Flores, Salo and Silas. Okay. And then people are leaving Catholicism. They are turning over their material possessions. They're rebaptizing. They're coming close to this Pentecostal stuff. Salo and Silas. Okay. This person, Joseph Stewart, who has been named previously in the previous piece, this guy is also involved in spreading Pentecostalism, etc. Okay, so Salo and Silas are here's where Aaron comes in. Eusebio Joaquin Gonzalez. He resigns from the army. He assumes duties as a domestic servant for the preachers. Salo and Silas. He does his duties. He's a believer. He has a divine intervention in his life. On April 6, 1926, Aaron is called, blah, blah, blah. He says, see the previous chapter to learn more about this this origin story of La Luz del Mundo. Okay. Eusebio says he learned from Salo and Silas, but that he then changed the course of his life after this revelation from God. Okay. He had direct contact with God. And then he goes down to Guadalajara from Monterrey, where he is at, him and his wife Elisa. They go some distance south. It's kind of funny that this guy is talking and describing the whole story, and he's not just gonna say, however many hundreds of miles they walked across Mexico to get to Guadalajara. Instead, he's just gonna say some distance south, which they walk south across Mexico to get to Guadalajara, but I don't know. Like I would just, if it were me, I would write a number to really illustrate the for real journey that Aaron had to go on, that he felt he had to go on back in the day. Okay, so Aaron arrives to Guadalajara on December 12th, and people are parading around a statue of the Virgin. Aaron condemned the celebration because of its Catholicism. He says it's the greatest hoax. Wait, hold on. Aaron was concerned that Guadalajara would celebrate, quote, the greatest hoax that our country has received in believing that there exists in the heavens a woman of flesh and blood, and that the woman showed herself in the cloak of an Indian so that the image of the beast would be adorned on the date of great meaning to humanity. Anyways, he's just making fun of the Virgin, is what they're saying about Aaron here. Okay, so Guadalajara becomes the headquarters of La Luz del Mundo. Aaron is entering this very hardcore Catholic world. Patricia Fortuny is a writer about La Luz del Mundo. Is not a member herself, but she has written some good stuff. And Mary Puckett is a student of Patricia Fortuny. Fortuny was on Puckett's dissertation committee. And so therefore that really explains a lot of the good work in Puckett's work, a lot of the good research and understanding in Puckett's work. But I want to say that it's kind of funny that Fortuny is being mentioned, and could be much more engaged in other parts of this of what Introvigne was writing about. Okay, so there's the Cristero War, there's the Great Depression, there's World War II. Okay, there's just kind of early context of Pentecostalism and the growth of La Luz del Mundo. It's growing in California and in Texas. There's kind of a relatively open border between Mexico and the United States back then. La Luz del Mundo is a conservative, Bible-oriented Protestant church. It affirmed the authority of the scriptures, salvation in Christ, water baptism, spirit baptism, and it hoped in Christ's second coming. Women were to dress conservatively with long dresses, wear no makeup or jewelry or jeweled adornments, and refrain from cutting their hair. Men had few regulations concerning their appearance, except to keep their hair near neatly trimmed. Not as common, at least among Christians. It's weird. These two past sentences are kind of different from what Massimo Introvigne wrote previously, where one could say there is a kind of like gender apartheid in La Luz del Mundo, where the women and the policing of their manners of dress is more harsh than it is for men. In Massimo Introvigne's, thing, he's saying that, oh, the men have to wear like suit jackets and ties, and most often they're nicely dressed. But then also, says nothing about their hair or whatnot, because for the women keep their hair short, not keep their hair short. They keep their hair long. They wear head coverings, and then also from like some teenage year, 14 or prior, the young girls at the time, and then women, those people, females are wearing long skirts, and that is much more harsh and different and demanding than for the men. But here, J. Gordon Melton is saying that men have few regulations. Massimo Introvigne made it seem like it was more like 50-50, but here J. Gordon Melton is saying that it's actually like, yeah, the women do have it harder than the men, right? Does that seem right? Does that make sense? There's some sort of daylight between the way that the previous writer talks about men and women and how they dress and whatnot, and the way that this guy is writing. So not as common, at least among Christian groups, the sexes are segregated during worship. Okay, the women on one side and the men on the other. Also, common to the time as an ordained ministry developed, women were excluded from serving as pastors, although, of course, women were invited into a spectrum of non-ordained ministries. Okay, so he's just saying that women are involved in a certain way, but they cannot be like pastors and like part of the council of bishops and all that other stuff. They're not part of this of the top-notch like leadership of the church. But okay, let's move on. Growth over the first decades of the church's life was steadily, if not spectacular. The work into the middle of the century, so the 1950s, 60s, etc. The work into the middle of the century bore visible fruit when in the 1950s, the Apostle Aaron was able to purchase some 14 acres of land. Okay, so he's just kind of just going over like the history of the church that Massimo Introvigne already went through, and like how La Luz del Mundo managed to get the territory that is now Hermosa Provincia. So he's just I don't know, he's just spent like several pages kind of treading like the same ground as the previous writer, right? He hasn't really gotten to the Texas stuff. So the headquarters in Guadalajara is kind of like a utopian like setting, whatever that means. It's an intentional community where they construct their own homes. It's called the Beautiful Province, Hermosa Provincia. Church leaders gathered to strategize on the international expansion of the church, even as they watched the blossoming of the fruits of their labors as the Hermosa Provincia emerged. As the church developed, where the concentration of members allowed, additional intentional communities have been founded following the pattern of the initial Hermosa Provincia. Okay, I don't know what he's saying there. I don't really know what he's saying there. Oh, I do, but I don't have anything to say about it. I want to move on. 25 years after the church's founding in 1959, it had spread to more than 20 of Mexico's 31 states. Okay, that's a number, that we're given in regards to how to track the church's growth, and it's spreading. 31 states have made its initial efforts into reaching the international community. Meanwhile, along the country's northern border, it was beginning to interact with the emerging emerging American Pentecostal movement that was flourishing along the Rio Grande Valley from Brownsville, Texas to El Paso, Texas, on both sides of the river, so the Rio Grande River. Pentecostalism had emerged as a restorationist movement. Okay, he describes Pentecostalism. While participating in this restorationist agenda, La Luz del Mundo made two important adjustments. The first, the church restored not just its apostolic faith in its teachings and practice, but also the apostolic office. The Apostle Aaron has had, and its successors in office are seen as having a special relationship with God and as guiding the church with the knowledge that they alone have received from God, the Father, and Jesus Christ. The Apostle Aaron and his successors, Samuel and Nathan, are by no means objects of worship, but they have been assigned the highest status of the community and are shown respect and deference comparable to that given the original 12 apostles. So, like, he's saying, so Melton's not a church member himself. He's not a believer in any way himself, to my knowledge. But here he's recognizing that these guys are super duper important, highest status in the whole community, but they are by no means objects of worship. The things that should be worshipped, to say things, for lack of a better word, the things that should be worshipped are God, Jesus, etc. But Melton is not going to exactly say, but here we should recognize that the funnel through which that worship gets to arrive to those things is through the apostle, who is the person who has the highest status in the community, who is the human being at the top of the community, who oversees the whole thing, who moves the puzzle pieces. And it's like I don't know, they're describing this concentration of power without exactly like saying it, and like trying to say that it's not crazy, or it's not like, for now in hindsight, we can say that it is not, they could try to say that it was not some sort of grounds where corruption and just horrible things and abuses of power could happen. But that's what I'm trying to say, is that, like, they're talking about the origins of concentration of power and the hierarchy and the solidification of that hierarchy. And it's weird because, like, yeah, the hierarchy could breed and host and be host to like just terrible things happening in the organization. Okay, so the churches in Texas. The lead churches in Houston constructed during Samuel's time. There's 14 columns in a little. There's a picture here in a place outside of the church. 12 for the original apostles, and then 2 for Samuel and his predecessor Aaron. Okay. Second, rather than accepting the oneness perspective of the Jesus-only Pentecostals, the apostle Aaron proposed a perspective that was quite similar to the teachings of Arius, the 4th century bishop and theologian whose perspective challenged the emerging Trinitarian. Okay, whatever. Basically, here he's talking about the Trinity and saying that, like, Luz Del Mundo doesn't believe in it. Or doesn't abide by that framework. In his statement of faith, La Luz del Mundo affirms belief in the existence of God, one and universal, according to what is established in the first book of Kings, 8:20, 8:23, etc., etc. Okay, so as the church has grown, its particular theological position has become the object of some exceedingly harsh perspective by its religious competitors. Like, duh, like that's what religious groups do, is they just put each other in exceedingly harsh criticism against one another, and that's how they sort of justify their own righteousness and the wrongness of every other group on the planet, because religious groups more often than not are zero sum in their view, wherein they feel like they are right and everyone else is wrong. And given the accumulation of all these perspectives, and, like, religious movements are just, that's just part of the DNA within religious movements. La Luz del Mundo itself was born from exceedingly harsh criticism of its religious competitor or predecessor, or the religious status quo at the time. So, say Catholicism. So, like, this writer is talking about theological opponents of La Luz del Mundo, but, like, he's not really portraying them as clearly as they can be. Is that what I want to say? I'm not sure if that's what I want to say, but it's just strange. It's just like, yeah, like, of course there's going to be opponents to every religious group. Like, they just know this. They have to survive against this. They survive despite this. So, entrance into Texas, finally. By 1960, Apostle Aaron was ready to bring his restorationist program into Texas. Previously, Pentecostalism was in Texas through the COGIC, the UPC. They had breakout moments in Texas. Okay, and then like the 19 okay, Apostle Aaron began the 1960s with a visit to Matamoros, a city in Mexico's Tamaulipas state, which sits just across the Rio Grande from Brownsville, Texas, way down in South Texas. This visit was not, of course, his first to the city. He had originally traveled there in 1934, very early in his apostolic career. On his first visit, he would run into some hostility during the initial attempts to preach to residents. And okay, and then he met a person named as Mr. Ball, just known only as Mr. Ball. Ball stood up and defended the apostle against angry Catholics. Okay, so Aaron is in Texas. He's talking, and there's this guy Ball, which could be Henry C. Ball, is what this guy says. Intriguing possibility. It could be Henry C. Ball, who was defending Aaron when he was visiting Texas and preaching and whatever else. Anyways, in 1960, the apostle inquired about the man who had defended him 26 years earlier. I learned that Ball was now presiding in San Benito, a town some 30 miles north of Brownsville. He had made his way to the Ball's residence and confirmed that he was the same Ball of the 1934 incident, and during a joyful reunion was able to thank him for his actions years previously. In return, Ball was able to point to at least one person who might be open to receiving the apostle's message. Following their visit, Apostle Aaron and his entourage moved on to San Antonio, where they hoped to find one Jesus Lopez, a local preacher whom Ball, okay, I don't know, some guy. From the initial preaching of the apostle and several assisting preachers who accompanied him on the San Antonio trip, a small congregation was formed on March 20th, 1960. Jesus Lopez, Dolores, okay, these people. San Antonio had become Mexican America's most important center in Texas, and the congregation would steadily grow, emerging as the center of the church and would expand across the state from there. In 1965, several preachers in San Antonio, Texas, would bring the message to Houston, where they would operate a small house for several years, purchasing land on Bostic Street in Northeast Houston, where congregants erected a small church building in which they were able to incorporate the unique statuary structures that identify La Luz del Mundo's worship centers around the world. Okay. So he's just talking about a small church in Houston now. And then from there, they get their major church in like 2005. But here he's going to talk about how Houston ends up becoming the center or the capital of the church, instead of San Antonio. San Antonio was that at one point, but then Houston becomes that. So the work in Houston, which began in the wake of a watershed event for the church internationally, the death of Apostle Aaron in 1964, and the calling of his son Samuel Joaquin Flores as his successor. I use the term watershed in place of another term, crisis, often used in discussing the death of a new religion's founder. In the past, many assumed that the death of the new religion's founder presented a crisis or a trauma, threatening the very existence of a new religion. This assumption, based on a minuscule evidential base, was among the several truisms about new religious movements discarded as new religions studies emerged in the 1970s and 1980. Okay, so he should say right here the 1970s and the 1980s, because he talks about 1985, 1988, and then later 1991. So there's this kind of funny like typo here, or like this like fun like copy editing mistake here. But the important thing here is that like J. Gordon Melton is also writing in the way that Massimo Introvigne also writes at a certain point in the previous article. And by that I mean J. Gordon Melton is also saying here that like, oh yeah, new religions start. La Luz del Mundo is not the only one. At one point, Apostle Aaron dies in 1964. So almost like 20 years after La Luz del Mundo is founded. But hey, given from my perspective, I know a bunch of religious movements, and you know, sometimes when their founder dies, it can be seen by outsiders as a moment of like collapse and death, but actually that's not the case. There is no crisis or no trauma. Rather, La Luz del Mundo is typical, like other religious movements that I know, because those groups can have those moments of crisis or trauma and yet continue to survive into the future. La Luz del Mundo, whatever those members may believe of how special they are and magical that God is and is on their side and whatever else and manifests himself and whatnot. From my perspective, J. Gordon Melton, I don't believe in any of that bullshit. And actually, La Luz del Mundo is kind of typical, like other groups. Other religious movements their founders can fucking die, and their leaders, if that person is not their founder as well. Anyways, their leadership and whatever else can also go through controversies and schisms and whatever else, but they can still survive. La Luz del Mundo is no different from all those other groups. And so like what the fuck is it gonna be? Is La Luz del Mundo exceptional and one of the fastest growing groups in the world, or is it not? Or is it like typical, like these other groups that are new, that grow to whatever extent, that their members, that their leaders die, their leaders go through controversy, etc., and yet the group can still survive? Like, in this case, La Luz del Mundo is, but like it's I hope this makes sense, because in that a lot of this doesn't make sense when you put it next to when you compare it like very directly. Okay, so the death of the founder is, of course, an important event which members suffer as a loss, and following that, they pause to mourn before continuing the mission to which the founder has pointed them. Critics often denigrating first-generation religious movements as merely personality cults built around the founders, and hence less than serious religions assume that a founder's death took the heart of the religion from it. However, the overwhelming, okay, so here he's just saying what I just said. Certainly, that was the case of La Luz del Mundo, which in the years after the death of the Apostle Aaron assumed a sharp upward trajectory in Texas. The initial congregation in San Antonio, from San Antonio, the church spread across the state. Today, it is one of the largest Mexican American denominations, operating in the state with more than 80 congregations. Meanwhile, in Mexico, La Luz del Mundo was expanding to include more than 1 million members and emerged as the second largest church in the country. So Aaron died. Samuel comes in. At some point, the church continues to grow in Texas. It goes on a sharp upward trajectory in Texas and in other places around the world. But yet, it's strange that around this time, he says that in Mexico, it was expanding to include more than 1 million members and emerged as the second largest church in the country. That's not true, right? Like, was that ever true? Was La Luz del Mundo ever the second largest church or religious group in Mexico at any point? I don't think so, because again, look at this claim, and then look also at the claim from Iñegi in January 2021, where they said that in Mexico, La Luz del Mundo only has like around 190,000 church members, or around to 200,000 church members. It doesn't go to 200. It goes to like 190 and some change. But that is not even a fifth of 1 million members. I don't think at any point in Mexico, La Luz del Mundo has ever had 1 million members or more. But yet here, J. Gordon Melton has said that, yeah, at some point they reached 1 million members. At some point, if not now into the present day, La Luz del Mundo is the second largest church in the country. Or, like Massimo Introvigne says, the most viable alternative to Catholicism in Mexico. No, because again, Massimo cites previously, in the previous article. Am I wrong here? Please let me know if I'm wrong. Am I mistaken here? In the previous article, Massimo Introvigne says that that the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons or some other groups, he names 2 groups, and he says that that group has 1 million members, and another one has 1 million and something else. Something like that. We can scroll up and find it. But basically, the point is that there's just such a weird mishmash discussion of numbers and claims to that, and just just claims of verifiable claims about the world that I'm not even gonna. It's hard to verify them and to count them. I'm sure that's resource extracting. It takes so much time. What is a member, etc. But there's just such a weird and strange radioactivity and dysmagnetism that happens between these different statements that are going on in this journal and how they are trying to describe and portray La Luz del Mundo. Some of these statements from different people repel themselves from one another, and they seem strange, and they don't seem as right as they could be, as right and as clear and as counted and as dotted I's and crossed T's maximized as they could be. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Let's keep going. J. Gordon Melton goes on. The move to Houston in 1965 would also prove auspicious for the church. Houston is the largest city in Texas and would soon replace San Antonio as the base of La Luz del Mundo in the region. That's something that I said earlier. The congregation would initially meet on H Street. The numbers grew. That building would be demolished in the 1990s for a new building. There's a period missing here. There's just like a copy editing mistake here. There's a period missing here. That transition would become visible at the end of the 1990s when the land was ready for the construction of the church's new temple. So Houston, La Luz del Mundo, they got a new church, a new temple in 2005, inaugurated then. It had been built for some years prior. The large building was at least partially inspired by St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. So by some Catholic motherfucking building in Rome. It was inspired by that. And it's like Greco-Roman is the Central Houston church with an accompanying mansion-like minister's residence. Motherfucker. No, it's not. It's not a mansion-like minister's residence. There is the Greco-Roman grand, just bedazzled church in Houston along the highway 59, 69, whatever it's called. There is that major church with its wings, and it looks like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome and whatnot. And there is a smaller, separate residence that is kind of like the residence for the apostle, supposedly. But that building is actually kind of small. It's kind of like a small house with like 2, 3 bedroom, 4 bed. I don't know how much is in there. It's not a lot of space. It's actually kind of small. But it sits there. And actually it's not even really fucking utilized by anybody. If anybody is utilizing it, it's the apostle. And I, as someone that grew up in Houston and as basically dozens and hundreds of other people can tell you that have been there and lived there and have, looked at the building for so long, it's actually unoccupied a majority of the time, a grand majority of the time, because Samuel, when he would stay in other places. There are other properties near that property, near that church, that this guy would stay at. He would stay at other places. The local minister does not stay there. He stays on a place across the street from not Bostic Street, but like whatever the other street is. I can't think of it right now. The minister, whoever it is, stays across the street from there. They don't stay in this building that is supposedly a mansion like. The building that the minister stays in is rather nice. It's rather substantial. It's not a mansion itself. It's kind of comparable to any other building in that fucking place. That place is not a mansion, and that place is much larger than the little white building that is next to the temple. That little white building is not a mansion either itself. It is for sure bedazzled with its marble and it's white and has the emblem of the Joaquins and whatever other bullshit there is around these buildings. But it's not a fucking mansion. It's I don't know. It's just not a mansion, and it's actually unoccupied a majority of the time. A majority of the time. The church was especially proud of the interior of the temple. It has ornate decorations. They were both designed and installed by church members. Okay. But like here, look, here we're looking at this right here on this picture. Thank God there's a fucking picture now. Here's the building of Houston, the temple. Okay, and here's the little white. You probably can't see my cursor, but off to the right, there is that white building. It is, I guess it actually does look kind of larger than the houses that are behind it, that are part of the neighborhood there. But it's very important to just recognize that it's not really like a mansion. It's not that big of a fucking mansion. It's not that big of a mansion. And even then, it is unoccupied a majority of the time. And it is other and off screen, out of the crop of this picture, is actually where the minister stays. You know, the minister could be staying at that white fucking house that is unoccupied a majority of the time. And yet, you know, no, instead the minister stays in another house across the street that is off frame to the right and whatever else. And then off to the left is where the parking lot is of where church members park their cars and then walk across the street to go to the church. But yeah, I hope I'm not lingering on this too much. So Conroe, Freeport, Pasadena, Victoria, Port Arthur, etc., are the places in Texas that have major congregations. And also like why put Texas in parentheses here? It's implied that these towns are in Texas because it's, you know, you're talking about cities that are in Texas that are not Houston. But like, why would you put the parentheses here? Presumably it's because you don't want to mix this Pasadena up with the California Pasadena. But like, your reader would know this. But like, I don't know. Like, yeah, like you should be busy putting periods in other sentences, right? Like not like doing this. Anyways, in Houston proper, following the inauguration of the current Bostic Temple Church, the older building on Haight Street sat empty. That site is currently 2020 being renovated to presume prayers again, but reflecting the growth of the church among historians of other than Mexican heritage. The services will all be conducted in English. La Luz del Mundo now has 6 temples across the country where prayers are offered exclusively in English. Multilingual pastor Bigvai Estrada leads the Haight Temple. I mean, I guess, like, I don't know why name drop this person here, but I guess mention that like, yeah, La Luz del Mundo now has temples that are across the United States. Across the United States, La Luz del Mundo has, get this, people, just 6 temples where the church stuff is only conducted in English. And all these other places, it's Spanish. And then, you know, I can say that at some point there was a little more English that trickled in eventually in later years. But for the most part, it's Spanish. And it's hardcore Spanish. And hardcore Mexicans, Salvadorians, Latinos, Hispanics, etc., you know, non-white people, and sometimes white people trickled in, and sometimes non-white, non-Latino people also trickled in. But still, like what is the church big or not? Because at this point, this guy's just saying that, oh yeah, there's actually just 6 temples where La Luz del Mundo is conducted exclusively in English. One of them is like a mile or two from this place, and it's actually crazy smaller than this location that we're looking at now. And it's actually only just one of 6 across the rest of the country. Like, well, that doesn't sound like the fastest growing religion in the world. That doesn't sound like the fastest growing religion in the world. So the street opened up in 2005. The Apostle Samuel inaugurated it. Okay, there was a succession of pastors. In 2000, Benjamin Joaquin, one of Samuel Joaquin's sons, was installed in Houston, and that's when this guy like basically oversaw the initial plans to construct this church, and the church constructed, and then he goes away. Yeah, that's important to know, because that guy is not the apostle now, but he, you know, he was the son of the previous apostle, and instead his brother is the person that became the apostle. But anyways, here's the last paragraph of J. Gordon Melton. As La Luz del Mundo became visible in the 1970s, critics representing its religious competitors emerged to attack it both for its proselytizing efforts and its unorthodox theological stance. It continued to grow. Representatives of the cult awareness movement have also arisen, their most virulent assault being launched in the 1990s around a baseless rumor that the church was planning a mass suicide when its members gathered for their annual Holy Supper ritual. Most recently, Apostle Nason had been arrested and charged with several accounts of sexual abuse. Although church leaders maintain that the charges appeared to also be fabricated and that they expect his full exoneration. This is a weird paragraph. What the fuck are you fucking talking about? So basically, he's talking about how in the 1970s, whatever, just there's always been critics of the church, but I don't know. It's kind of vague here. It's not really talking in solidified information in time. But then he talks about how there are cult awareness groups that in the 1990s started to worry that that the church La Luz del Mundo was planning a mass suicide at its Holy Supper ceremony. So look, hear what he's talking about without mentioning it, which he kind of should mention to bolster his point. J. Gordon Melton is talking about the Heaven's Gate religious suicide, whatever event in the 1990s in California. And basically it was Heaven's Gate, and these people, just kind of had a mass suicide because they thought they were going to be transported to an asteroid and whatever else, right? So that's like a cult like group. That's an interesting instance of mass suicide. And then of course, like in the 1970s, is when Jim Jones's church and like hundreds of people, upwards of like 900, 800 people, end up committing suicide in the jungles of Guyana and South Africa, if I have that right. But yeah, basically that happens in the 1970s. This other Heaven's Gate thing happens in the 1990s. And then here, J. Gordon Melton is saying that like, oh yeah, back then people worried that La Luz del Mundo would commit a mass suicide, which is just kind of like jarring. Like, why just kind of bring this up? And then he's saying, and then he's not going to bring up the fact that Samuel Joaquin in 1997 was accused of sexual abuses and other crimes in Mexico, in Guadalajara back then. But he's going to mention this like supposed fear of mass suicide, but he's not going to talk about that 1997 thing. But then now, in the present day, in the more recent, day, he's going to talk about the 2019 incident where Nason is arrested and then charged with several accounts of sexual abuse, et cetera, et cetera. And he says church leaders have maintained that the charges appear to be fabricated and that they expect his full exoneration. His full exoneration never came. His full exoneration never came. And so I don't know. This paragraph is just kind of, it's contained within a certain paradigm, but it's just kind of bouncing all over the place. And just like Massimo Introvigne, this guy is landing the plane of his article and not engaging at all with oh yeah, here's why people leave the church. Here's the avenues that people take. Here's how the church can make it difficult for people to leave. Here's how the church tracks the numbers of the number of people that leave, etc. And it's actually, and how it makes up for it, and it is growing, etc. That's not happening here. Instead we get this writing that's not like very just clear, and it's just not good. It's just not as robust and real and as hard-hitting as it could be. I hope that makes sense. Let's finish. In the 21st century, La Luz del Mundo, like Pentecostalism in general, just Pentecostalism in general, has found itself on an upward trajectory. So like here, the guy is saying that like, yeah, you La Luz del Mundo people, I'm not a member, but like, yeah, you La Luz del Mundo people may feel like you're growing, like you're getting a lot of attention. We're writing this like academic journal bullshit on you and all that shit, but like and you may feel like you're on an upward trajectory, but from my perspective, yeah, you and all these other groups that you think are so wrong and so wrong through the lens of like the narcissism of small differences, you guys are they're so wrong. You were so right, but actually you're not that special because they're all on upward trajectories too. Does that make sense? Like he's just sort of undermining anything of La Luz del Mundo. It's so strange. Even as La Luz del Mundo anticipates the celebration of the centennial of the founding of the church only a few years into the future, so that's like 2026, while its recent history has not been without some controversy. Okay. It has not allowed the obstacles that it has encountered to detract from its continued reaching out to an ever expanding audience with its message. The question remains as to how long its continued pattern of growth can remain intact. It's funny. Like, this is just so funny. This guy's not a member. He's going to write about it. It's kind of a puff piece. It's kind of not. It kind of undermines the church in a certain way. And then it's also like, oh, yeah, the question remains as to how long its continued pattern of growth can remain intact. Well, motherfucker, it hasn't fucking remained intact for the past 4 years since this was published. And let's say for sure for the past 5 years since Nason was arrested in Los Angeles. The that upward trajectory of growth has like certainly been if not like neutralized, then like seriously mitigated, lowered, affected, etc. Just it's certainly not grown. And yeah, we're finally at the end of this, but like this writer is interesting because he's certainly talking about a growth of the church, but it's also like, yeah, it's also not that special. And then it's also kind of at mismatch with the claims of other people and how those things track. Our next piece is by Sara Pozos, who is a member of the church, who is a member of the church, who is a spokesperson of the church. And we've talked about her several times in this piece, on this channel before. The concept of the divinity in La Luz del Mundo. And the abstract, it reads, very few scholars have studied the theology of La Luz del Mundo. Okay. The article explores the concept of God. This article explores the concept of God in La Luz del Mundo and how the church approaches the eternal problems of suffering and happiness. It then examines La Luz del Mundo's vision of Jesus Christ, who is not regarded as God, nor as God the Son, but is recognized as the Son of God, who, through his sacrifice, opened the possibility of salvation once reserved for the Jews to the entire humankind. Do you mean like to the entirety of humanity, or to like all of humankind, to all of humankind? But here you say like to the entire humankind. I don't know. It's just kind of like, it's just not the best writing. This is not where we're gonna get from these people. I'll be right back.